Under the Mistletoe. A Winter Brothers of Palmar Island Romance. Written by Susanne. Chapter 1. The scent of freshly baked gingerbread cookies filled the cozy kitchen of the Winters family farm when Ethan set foot inside. His mother was wearing her red and green Christmas apron, pulling another tray out of the oven. "What's going on?" "That's a lot of cookies." The last time he'd seen this amount of baking out of the blue was when his grandmother had passed unexpectedly. His mom hadn't broken out into last-minute baking when his wedding had been cancelled at the last minute. And his mom had taken it almost as hard as he had. "Stop worrying. It'll give you wrinkles." She used a spatula to move the cookies to the cooling racks. "They're for the bake sale. We're raising funds for elementary school kids to go up to Myrtle Beach to see the Christmas show." "Or did you already forget about that?" Of course not. He had a soft spot for kids, and making sure every single child on the island had a nice Christmas was something he'd been passionate about for years. "Good. Then you won't mind taking these to the town square for me. You have time to shower and change before the cookies are baked and ready to go." She waved a kitchen towel in his direction. "Can I at least get a second cup of coffee first?" Ethan asked, pulling a cup from the cupboard. "I'll start a fresh pot and fill your travel mug." Up you go. She used the spatula to point to the stairs leading to the second floor of the home he'd grown up in. "You better do what she says," his father said, coming in the back door. "There's no arguing with the woman when she uses that tone of voice." "I know." Ethan smiled at his father. After 32 years as her son, he didn't mind running an errand for his mom, and she was right. He needed a shower after mucking out stalls for the past 2 hours. When he walked back downstairs, his short, sandy brown hair was still damp from the shower. As promised, his mother had fixed him a coffee in his favorite travel mug. He took a sip. It was exactly how he liked it. Sugary sweet with just a hint of cream. "I'm packing up the last of the cookies. You can start putting everything into this basket. All you need to do is give it to Miss Doris. She'll take care of the rest." Ethan bit back a groan. While he liked the elderly woman, she was a notorious busybody and had recently gotten it into her mind that it was time for Ethan to date again. It was a sentiment he didn't share. It would be a long time before he'd risk letting his heart get this mangled again. "Give the cookies to Miss Doris." "Got it. And look around the Christmas market while you're there. It's time you started shopping. See if you can find something nice for Zoe," his mother said when he picked up the basket and headed out the door. "Will do." If it was up to him, they might as well cancel Christmas this year, but his mom was right. He should get Zoe something nice. After years in New York, his cousin had recently come back to Palmar Island and promptly fallen in love. He liked her boyfriend Mason, and he wished her more luck and happiness than he'd experienced. The Palmar Island Christmas market was as stunning and festive as ever. A large decorated tree stood tall and proud in the center. As soon as night fell, it would shine so brightly you could see it from clear across the island. The sound of a band playing festive tunes carried across the space that was littered with stands and tables. He spotted the hot chocolate stand that was an annual favorite and reminded himself he had coffee left in the travel mug sitting in his truck. "Ethan, over here." An elderly woman in her late 60s with silver curls and steel-gray eyes waved at him. She was standing behind a table laden with baked goods. 2 other women, only slightly younger, stood by her side, one of them busy selling a bag of decorated sugar cookies. He walked over and put the basket on the last bit of space left on the table. "Mom sent these for the bake sale." "Thank you, honey. Her gingerbread cookies are always a big hit. These will sell in an instant." Miss Doris scrawled a price on a small slate tablet and propped it in front of the basket. It was far more than he'd spend on a bag of cookies, but then again, this was for a good cause. "Anything catches your fancy?" He scanned the table, doing his best to resist the temptation. "I think I'm good for now." Between my mom's cooking and that pumpkin pie you brought over the other day, I need to watch my sugar intake. Miss Doris waved him off. With all that hard manual labor on the farm, you'll burn it off in no time. Maybe later. Let me make a lap around the market and think about it, Ethan said. Go, have fun. And don't forget to stop by before you head back home. I'll save you a bag of pistachio cookies, Miss Doris said, putting one of the cellophane bags he'd eyed under the table. She knew him too well. Ethan strolled through the town square, taking in the stands where craft vendors and artists peddled their wares. Most of what he saw was a little too kitschy for his taste, but one tent caught his attention. The trees lining the opening were decorated in a traditional style, and a wooden sleigh held various pillows, baskets, and throws. Inside the tent, shelves and tables lined the perimeter, holding various decorative items that looked like they'd been curated by someone who enjoyed a festive holiday as much as he did. Frosted glass jars filled with fairy lights added a soft glow of light and a whimsical touch. Ethan stepped inside. This might be just the place to find something for his cousin and his mother. I'll be right with you, a woman with auburn hair streaming down her back called over her shoulder. Her voice sounded vaguely familiar. But then he'd lived on this small barrier island off the South Carolina coast his entire life. She was chatting with a couple of customers, waving her hands in front of her and moving around the tent, showing off her wares. Even from behind, he could tell how passionate she was about the collection of holiday items she'd lovingly displayed. He picked up a set of metal lanterns with reindeer shapes dancing around the perimeter of the glass panes. They would make the perfect gift for his cousin. And he had a pretty good idea that his mother would enjoy the hand-carved wooden bowl and spoon set that looked like it was made in a Slavic country. Are you shopping for someone special? The woman asked, stepping up beside him. Her sandalwood and vanilla scent engulfed him. My mother. He turned and had to look twice to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. Olivia Foster was as beautiful as the first time he'd seen her, her striking blue eyes meeting his. There's a matching rolling pin, if you're interested. She handed him the item in question, and Ethan got the impression that she was trying to place him. They'd only met once, in passing, not long before the worst night of his life, but he would never forget her exuberant smile and sparkling personality, so different from Sarah's cool and reserved tendencies or his own introverted disposition. He took the pin from her and studied it carefully. The surface of the rolling pin was divided into multiple squares, as if someone had taken a chessboard and wrapped it around the cylinder. Each of the squares had a decorative border and a tiny figure or scene carved into it. You roll it across cookie dough to make a pattern before you bake it, Olivia said. That sounds perfect. I'll take the set and those 2 lanterns over there. He pulled out his wallet and watched the woman, who was supposed to be the maid of honor at his wedding, carefully wrap them in ivory-colored tissue paper. She tied a bit of twine around each parcel, tucking a sprig of mistletoe wrapped with a red ribbon into each before handing them to him. Do you need a bag? Ethan shook his head. He was ready to head back home. Aside from a quick stop for pistachio cookies. I'll carry them. Is cash okay? Olivia nodded and tapped her well-manicured fingers across the screen of an iPad. That'll be $130. Ethan handed her the exact change and left the tent, making room for a small crowd of people, before Olivia could realize why he looked familiar. It wasn't a conversation he was ready for. He strode back across the market toward the bake sale. Was that Olivia Foster I saw you with? Miss Doris asked when she handed him the cookies she'd set aside. It was. How do you know her? Ethan asked. Olivia was from Boston and had only been in town for a few hours on the day they met. She moved here a couple of months ago, making quite a name for herself as an interior designer and Christmas decorator. Everyone down in Prince George's is hiring her to come up with designs for this holiday season. You know how people get down there. Miss Doris rolled her eyes and Ethan had to bite back a laugh. He knew exactly what the older woman meant. Prince George's residents had more money than they knew what to do with. For most of them, the vast mansions were third or fourth houses, used to entertain and impress clients and business associates. If Olivia could get a foot in the door there, she'd be set for life. Good for her. She has taste. I'll give her that. Yes, she does, Miss Doris said with a wink that had Ethan running for the hills. He did not need the island's notorious matchmaker to get any ideas about him and Olivia Foster. Because that was something that was never going to happen. No matter how beautiful she was. Chapter 2. The scent of strong coffee hit her the moment Olivia set foot in the roasted bean. The place was quickly becoming a favorite. What can I get you? Vanessa, the young barista with the purple hair, asked. The usual? Gingerbread maple latte with an extra shot of espresso? Yes, please. She was quickly becoming addicted to the holiday drink. It was just the pick-me-up she needed before the meetings and home walkthroughs she'd set up with 2 last-minute clients this afternoon. She walked to a table by the window and put her bag down. Pulling out her laptop, she settled in to go through emails and catch up on the never-ending paperwork. Olivia couldn't wait to get this new business off the ground so she could hire an assistant. She looked up and stared out the window while her computer booted up and saw a familiar face. She still couldn't place the handsome man about her age. There was something so familiar about him. She was sure she'd met him before, and more than in passing. He looked right at her while crossing the street and Olivia raised her hand to wave. The familiar stranger returned the greeting before striding down the street and out of sight. Olivia? Olivia Foster? A female voice asked. Olivia turned and looked up into another familiar face. One she did not expect to see here on Palmar Island. Zoe? The one and only. What are you doing here? Zoe walked over, and when Olivia stood, the other woman pulled her into a tight hug. It's been ages. Olivia did the math. It had been almost 15 years since they attended boarding school in Vermont together. It has, and I could ask you the same thing. What are you doing here? Olivia stepped back and got a better look at the person who'd been a close friend throughout high school. I live here, Zoe said when Vanessa walked up with Olivia's latte. Here you go. The barista handed her a large mug topped with whipped cream and cookie crumbles. Anything for you, Zoe? Yes, please. 2 large coffees to go. Things are busy at the gallery and Mason needs a boost of energy to get through it, Zoe said. Take a seat, let's catch up, Olivia said, excited to have a friend on the island. She'd stayed busy since her move here, but she was starting to miss having people to hang out with outside of work. I only have a minute, but yes, we should definitely catch up. Zoe pulled out a chair and sat down. What brings you to Palmar Island? I was visiting a friend of mine here this summer and fell in love with the place, Olivia said. How about you? I've been coming here since I was a little girl. My aunt and uncle live here. Zoe smiled, her hazel eyes sparkling in the light of the winter sun. This is the island you kept talking about? Recognition dawned on Olivia. She remembered sitting up many a night listening to Zoe talk about the small-town community she'd escaped to each summer. The one and only. I can't believe you're here. Zoe rose when Vanessa called her name. What are you doing tonight? I have a couple of meetings down in Prince George, but I'm free after that, Olivia said. Here's my number. Call me. I'm meeting a couple of friends for dinner at the Brick Oven. Why don't you join us? Are you sure? As much as Olivia would love to spend time with her friend, she didn't want to intrude. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't. It's a couple of girlfriends. I think you'll like them, Zoe said. Plus, the restaurant has some of the best pizza south of the Mason-Dixon line. Olivia laughed. All right. How can I say no to good pizza? I'll call you on my way back to the island. She watched Zoe leave before getting back to her computer. After the emails and invoices were handled, she glanced through her notes for the day's meetings. None of them should take too long. This late in the season, There were no big jobs that involved designing entire holiday concepts from scratch. All she could do was a little tweaking and polishing. It was enough to get a foot in the door, though, and her calendar for next year was filling up. Affluent residents were hiring her to get their vacation homes ready for Easter, 4th of July, and Halloween, in addition to the Christmas season. It's going to be a busy year, Olivia muttered to herself before taking the last sip of her coffee and packing up to head out for her first meeting. Both went well and even quicker than expected. People in the gated community south of Palmar Island weren't just rich. They had more money than they knew what to do with and were happy to write Olivia a blank check and have her deal with all the details, including design choices. It was a nice change of pace from the overbearing and controlling clientele she'd had in Boston. And it left her with enough time to head home for a quick shower and an outfit change before running back out the door to meet Zoe and her friends for dinner. "I'm so glad you could make it," Zoe called from across the room of the small Italian pizza place. As the name of the establishment implied, it had a brick oven, and if the scent wafting through the room was any indication, Zoe's earlier comment hadn't been as much of an exaggeration as Olivia had feared. "Thanks for the invite." Olivia looked at the women gathered around the table. Everyone seemed to be about her own age. Zoe made the introduction, and by the time their food arrived, Olivia was deep in conversation with Chloe, who ran the local flower shop, and Sophie, who owned the Book Nook, Palmar Island's independent bookstore. "What do you do, Olivia?" Chloe asked, biting into a slice of mushroom pizza. "I'm an interior designer, specializing in holiday decor." Olivia grabbed a slice. Zoe had been right. The pizza was delicious. "Was that your stand at the Christmas market?" Sophie asked. "It was. I'll be there this weekend too." Olivia smiled. "I've been curating Christmas decorations and handcrafted gifts. I should stop by. I really need to decorate the bookstore. It's been so busy with everything going on at home and with the business." Sophie took a sip of water and Olivia noticed the dark circles under the woman's eyes. "Would you like some help?" she asked. Sophie laughed. "I don't think I can afford to hire you. I'll pick out some things this weekend, though. I was offering to volunteer. No big fancy design job, but I'm pretty handy with empty boxes and wrapping paper," Olivia said. "And I'd be happy to donate some flowers. I have a bunch of poinsettia plants sitting around and I'm sure there's something we can do with a bit of greenery," Chloe said. "I'm happy to help in any way I can," Zoe said. "If nothing else, I can whip up some graphics and fresh marketing materials." "When do we want to do this?" Olivia asked. "How about later this week? After both shops close?" Sophie asked. "I'll provide wine and snacks." "Sounds like a plan to me." Zoe raised her water in salute, and the four women clinked their glasses. By the time Olivia left the restaurant, she felt better about her move here and life in general. And she was looking forward to spending an evening with her new friends. Maybe this holiday season wouldn't be as lonely as she'd feared. "How is business?" Zoe asked when she walked into Olivia's Christmas stand the following Saturday. "Booming. At this rate, I won't have anything left before it's time to close up shop," Olivia said with a huge grin on her face. "I'm going to have to pull some strings with my suppliers to get fresh inventory for next week." "I'm glad." Zoe picked up a glass ornament and turned it in her hand, looking at it in the light. "Take it," Olivia said. "It's yours." "I couldn't." "Didn't you just tell me you're low on things to sell?" Zoe asked. Olivia waved her hands around the interior of the tent. While the shelves weren't as full as they had been this morning, she was far from sold out. Yet. "I'm exaggerating. Besides, one ornament more or less won't make a difference. It will look lovely on your tree." "Thank you." Zoe pulled her in for a hug. "And thank you for helping Sophie with the bookstore. I ran into her at the coffee shop this morning and people are raving about how pretty it looks. I wouldn't be surprised if you get some clients from it." "That would be nice," Olivia said. Not that she needed more. She had almost booked her calendar for next winter. "There you are, Zoe. I thought we'd lost you." A woman in her late 50s walked into the tent, followed by the handsome man she kept running into and still couldn't place. "Aunt Maggie, come check out Olivia's stuff. I think you'll love these carved spoons," Zoe said. "Olivia, this is my aunt and my cousin, Ethan." At the sound of his name, the penny finally dropped. "Ethan Winter?" Olivia asked, staring at the man who wasn't a stranger. She tried to process the shock. Not that it should have come as such a big surprise that she was running into him here. It was his home after all, and, in a way, he'd been the reason she'd come here this past summer and fallen in love with the place. "That's my name," he says. "And you're Olivia, Sarah's friend?" There was pain in his eyes. "We met in passing this summer," Olivia remembered the day. Sarah had joined her for lunch at the country club that was supposed to be the reception venue. Ethan had dropped her off and introduced himself, before taking off to take care of farm chores. "We did." Ethan glanced at her before turning to watch his mother and cousin shopping. "It's nice to see you again." "Liar." The words were out of her mouth before she realized what she was saying. "Excuse me?" Ethan turned back, his brown eyes staring at her. Out of the corner of her eye, Olivia saw his mother and Zoe turn as well. Great. They'd heard their brief exchange. "Forget I said anything." Ethan shook his head and folded his arms across his chest, pulling the fabric of the gray wool sweater he wore. Olivia shrugged. "You don't look pleased to see me again." Ethan barked out a sad excuse for a laugh. "Can you blame me?" Olivia shook her head. "No. What Sarah did to you?" "How is dear Sarah?" Ethan asked, his voice full of anger and sadness. "I don't know. We haven't been in touch since this summer." "That's surprising." "I thought you two were close," Ethan said, his eyes softening. "So did I." Olivia did her best to hide her own disappointment in the woman who had claimed to be her best friend. "You two know each other?" Zoe asked, stepping closer and looking from one of them to the other. "We do." Ethan's words were strained. "I was friends with Sarah," Olivia said. "Oh." Zoe looked as stunned as Olivia felt about all of this. "Olivia, these ornaments are adorable. Everything here is just perfect." Ethan's mother walked up with a bowl of painted metal ornaments from the 50s that struck a perfect balance between kitsch and style. "Isn't this time of year so much fun?" Olivia forced a smile on her face at the woman's genuine joy. "It is. Aunt Maggie, turns out we were all supposed to meet Olivia this summer," Zoe said, taking the bowl from the older woman. "She was Sarah's maid of honor." Zoe's aunt blinked before the smile returned to her face. "It's very nice to meet you, Olivia. Zoe tells me you went to school together." Olivia wasn't sure how to respond. "There you are, Maggie. I've been looking for you." Miss Doris, the elderly woman who rented Olivia her room while she was looking for a more permanent place, walked into the tent. The small space was getting quite crowded. At this rate, any paying customers would have trouble making their way inside. "Miss Doris, everything okay?" Ethan turned and put a comforting hand on the woman's arm. She was wearing a hand-knit Christmas sweater, depicting rows of Christmas trees, stars, and reindeer. "Yes, no. Not really." The kind woman looked confused, and her steel gray eyes were filled with sadness and disappointment. "What happened?" Maggie Winter walked over. Miss Doris shook her head. "I got a call from the theater up in Myrtle Beach. There was a scheduling mix-up and they don't have room for the kids." "Can't they switch to a different day?" Zoe asked. Miss Doris shook her head. "They are booked solid until mid-January." "What's going on?" Olivia asked, feeling lost in the conversation. "The kids will be so disappointed. For some of them, this was the only Christmas activity outside of school that they'd get to take part in." Miss Doris sounded close to tears, which was unlike her. She struck Olivia as someone who kept it together and fixed problems. You worked so hard to raise the money for the tickets, Zoe said. Let me make a call and see if I can fix this. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket and walked outside. Miss Doris and Aunt Maggie put their heads together, talking in soft voices. Olivia turned to Ethan. Can you tell me what's going on here? Maybe there's something I can do to help. Every year, Miss Doris and her friends raise funds to buy tickets and rent buses to take the children from Palmar Elementary up to Myrtle Beach to watch a Christmas show. They stop for dinner, and there are goodie bags for the kids. It's a whole big deal, Ethan said. And Miss Doris is right. For some of them, it's the highlight of the Christmas season. It was obvious all of this was bothering him almost as much as it was Miss Doris. Olivia looked up when Zoe stepped back into the tent. Her friend shook her head before joining the two older women and breaking the bad news to them. Are there a lot of underprivileged children on the island? Olivia asked. Everyone she met so far had been well off, some of them practically drowning in money. Her latest client was the widow of a billionaire real estate investor from Arizona who kept several houses in the area. Some more on the mainland. They go to Palmar Island Elementary, Ethan said. There's got to be something we can do. Some other activity, Olivia said. Miss Doris raised her head and looked at her. The woman's eyes brightened. You might be onto something, Olivia. She turned to look at Ethan and then his mother. How about the farm? What about the farm? Ethan asked. That's a wonderful idea, his mother said, catching on more quickly. We could decorate the house and the barns. Have a path with those candy cane poles that lead to enclosures. I wonder how the goats would feel about having bells around their necks or reindeer antlers. Ethan choked out a laugh. Not going to happen. The goats will eat either of those faster than you can fasten them on. His mother shrugged. You're not wrong. But there's a lot we can do to show the kids a good time on the farm. They'd love it. They could collect eggs, pet the small goats, see the young calves. Zoe was getting into the spirit of things. And Ethan, here, could play Santa. Don't you do hay rides in the summer? You could take the kids on one of those, Miss Doris said. Wrapped in blankets, of course. And they could warm up in the hay barn after. We'll have cookies and hot chocolate. Maybe watch a movie, his mother said. This is going to be so much fun. And more work than we have time for, Mom. Ethan looked disappointed. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't enjoy being the voice of reason. I'd be happy to help any way I can, she said. Aren't you busy with clients? Zoe asked. Most things will be wrapped up after this week, and I should have a few hours per day to spare until then. Anything for a good cause, Olivia said. That settles it. We're doing this. Why don't you both come to dinner tonight and we can start making plans, Maggie Winter said. I'm free tonight, Miss Doris said. How about you, Olivia? Olivia glanced at Ethan. His face was expressionless, and he wouldn't meet her eyes. Tonight works, she said, determined to prove to the man that she was nothing like Sarah. Chapter 3. Olivia went to school with Zoe, Henry, Maggie Winter said when she introduced her to Ethan's father later that evening. Zoe nodded her head. Between her, Ethan, and Miss Doris, the kitchen was crowded despite its size. Olivia shook the older man's hand, appreciating how the woman introduced her. It's nice to meet you. Henry Winter shook her hand. Welcome to our home. I hear you had an idea that will create a bunch of extra work for me. He sounded like his son, but unlike Ethan, his father seemed excited to host a bunch of elementary school children on the farm. Ethan, why don't you show Olivia around the place before we eat? Mrs. Winter said. It's almost dark. Ethan glanced out the window of the large eat-in kitchen where they had gathered. There's light in the barns. I'm sure Olivia would love to see the goats and calves. Stop by the hay barn on your way back. I'm sure she has some wonderful ideas about what we can do with the space to make it special for the children, his mother said. It's okay, Mrs. Winter. I can come back another day, Olivia said, glancing at Ethan. During daylight. Please, call me Maggie. Ethan doesn't mind, do you? She looked at her son and Zoe bit back a laugh. Of course not, Ethan said, looking less than pleased. You might want to bring your jacket. He waited for her by the door, grabbing a pair of flashlights on their way out. I'm sorry about this, Olivia said. I really can come back another time. Ethan lit the way, walking beside her as they made their way to one of the smaller outbuildings. It's fine. I just hate waking up the kids, he said. The kids? Olivia looked at him, confused. The young goats. They go down as soon as the lights do. I'm pretty sure their mothers won't appreciate us waking them up. His lips twitched up into a smile that was barely visible in the dim light. I imagine they are ready for some rest themselves, Olivia said. Ethan pulled open the door to the small barn-like structure. He pulled a string, and the space was bathed in a warm light. The bleating of goats greeted them, and several of what she assumed were adults looked up. Several tiny goats jumped up from their straw bedding and ran up to greet her. Aren't you adorable? Olivia thought about the viral videos she'd watched of goats in pajamas and decided that the real-life versions were even cuter, even without the added clothing. They are pretty fun to watch, Ethan admitted. Olivia reached down and petted the tiny animals. They were bundles of joy, and she would be perfectly happy standing here for hours watching them play. If you can tear yourself away, I have some baby calves to show you. Ethan grinned when she turned to look at him. We should probably let these guys get back to sleep. Olivia left the small building reluctantly but was quickly charmed by several milk cows and their babies. She had no idea how long they'd been gone when they made it to the hay barn. It's not much. We mostly use it to store hay to get us through the winter, Ethan said. The building was huge. Only half of it was taken up by hay bales. The rest held several pieces of machinery and an old Ford truck. Can we move those? Olivia asked, pointing to the vehicles. Ethan nodded. And could we use some of the hay bales for seating? Or would that ruin it? She asked, not sure how the goats and cows would feel about eating crushed straw. Shouldn't be a problem. Ethan grabbed one of the bales and slung it across his shoulder. He carried it over to her and put it down on the ground. Let's see how it sits. Olivia gently lowered herself on the bale, unsure if it would support her weight. It was surprisingly sturdy and comfortable. Ethan laughed. People have been using these as chairs for as long as anyone can remember. You didn't grow up in the country, did you? Olivia shook her head. Boston. I'm a big city girl. That explains a lot, he said. What's that supposed to mean? Olivia put a hand on her hip and glared at him, doing her best to hide her amusement. Just that it's obvious that you haven't been around a lot of farm animals. Or hay bales. Ready to head back before they send out a search party for us? Ethan asked. Almost. Olivia swallowed. This was as good a time as any to clear the air between them. Listen, about Sarah. Ethan held up a hand. I'm sorry about what I said earlier. None of this was your fault. You didn't make Sarah do what she did. It's not fair for me to project my feelings for her onto you. The pain in his eyes was back and Olivia wished she could say or do something to lessen it. Sarah and I grew up together in Boston. We lost touch when I went to boarding school, Olivia said. We didn't reconnect until earlier this year. I'm honestly not sure why she chose me as Maid of Honor. Though she was beginning to suspect it was because Sarah wasn't great at maintaining friendships, or any kind of relationship, for that matter. Like I said, it wasn't your fault. You don't have to explain yourself, Ethan said. I'd like to, though. If we're going to work together on this. Why are you so interested in helping children you don't even know? Ethan asked. Because I know what it feels like to have little to look forward to on Christmas. It wasn't something she talked about often, But the memory of waking up to the disappointment of no presents and no tree on Christmas morning was what drove her to help underprivileged children whenever she could. Ethan stared at her, but didn't say another word. I started volunteering in college. It kind of stuck. I'm glad there's something I can do around here. Especially if this place was truly becoming her new home. A small part of her still doubted she could pull it off, despite the long client list that proved otherwise. Ethan nodded. Let's see what we can do then, he said, leading the way back to the house where his parents, his cousin, and Miss Doris were waiting in the warm kitchen. I think we can do a lot. Ideas were forming in her mind, and she couldn't wait to jot them down and sketch them out. I'm not dressing up as Santa, though, Ethan said, holding the door to the kitchen open. Don't worry, son. I'll be happy to do the honors, his father said. You and your brothers can be my merry little elves. Chapter 4. The roofline of every single building on the Winters farm was adorned with icicle lights when Olivia pulled up in her silver Toyota RAV4. The sight would be spectacular at night. Her car wasn't the only one on the property. Quite a few other vehicles were parked in front of the house, and she saw Ethan walk up from the goat barn when she got out. Give me a hand, she called up to him. He strode over. What do you need help with? I brought a bunch of ornaments. I think the idea is to set up a tree in the barn and decorate it. All the boxes and crates need to go inside. Olivia popped the trunk of her SUV. We should probably take them straight to the barn, Ethan said. Who's bringing the tree? Your brother, I think, Olivia said. Which brother? I have 3 of them. Ethan stacked 3 boxes on top of each other and lifted them with ease. David? Donald? Olivia slung her purse across her shoulder and grabbed a box before following Ethan toward the barn. Something with a D. Daniel. Ethan groaned. There's no telling what he'll drag in. What makes you say that? She struggled to keep up with him. He's a little unconventional, Ethan said. That's an understatement, a man who looked a lot like Ethan said, stepping out of the barn. But lucky for us, and all the kiddos, Daniel came through. See for yourself. He grabbed the top box and turned to walk into the barn. That's my brother, Mark, Ethan said over his shoulder. I didn't know you were in town. Mom called and said you could use an extra pair of hands. Mark put down the box next to one of the most perfect Christmas trees Olivia had seen. Is that a balsam fir? Olivia asked, walking around the tree. It was tall, reaching almost to the top of the barn. It had to be close to 12 feet tall. It is. The third brother, who had to be Daniel, stepped out from behind the tree, pride shining in his eyes. You like? I do. Olivia kept circling the fir tree. It looked great from every angle. I thought they were rare this year. They are. Daniel's tone was smug. But I have my sources. And no quarrels about driving 6 hours to cut down a tree. Mark shook his head. It looks good. Ethan put down the remaining boxes. Daniel walked over to his brother and put an arm around his shoulder. Thanks. I'm glad someone here appreciates my efforts to make this special. We all appreciate you. Mrs. Winter walked into the barn, followed by Miss Doris, Zoe, and a few other women Olivia remembered seeing around town. Let's get to work. We have a tree to decorate. I don't think I brought enough ornaments, Olivia said, taking a more judicious look at the tree. Don't worry. We all brought some, and Mark bought every string of lights left at the hardware store. Mrs. Winter smiled at her encouragingly. I have a few more boxes in the trunk of my car, Olivia said. We're on it. Ethan took both of his brothers, and by the time she opened the boxes they carried inside, they were back with the rest. Mrs. Winter brought bags of popcorn and cranberries, and Zoe pulled a wagon full of ornament containers into the barn. 2 hours later, the tree was taking shape, but still looking a little sparse. What else do we have? Miss Doris asked. We could grab some candy canes from the store, Zoe said. That's a good idea. The kids will love those. Mrs. Winter looked pleased. I'll bake up some gingerbread men and hang them up with ribbons. If Olivia doesn't mind helping me tonight, we can bake a couple of batches of spritz cookies and do the same thing. Miss Doris looked at her expectantly. I don't mind at all. Won't they be too crumbly, though? Olivia asked. She'd made the old-fashioned German cookies with her grandmother and couldn't imagine how this was going to work. We'll form rings and thread pretty ribbons through the middle. They'll look like Christmas wreaths, Miss Doris said. We'll dip them in white chocolate and put sprinkles on them. It'll be perfect. Trust me. Don't argue with Miss Doris when it comes to baked goods, Ethan said with a wink. Here, Zoe said, hanging the last of the bulb ornaments Olivia brought. I'm heading to the store. Anyone want to go with me? I'll go, Daniel said, and the cousins left together. Why don't we head inside for a bit to warm up? Mrs. Winter said. We can string garlands in the house. I'll light a fire and put on a pot of coffee, Mr. Winter said, looking around the small crowd gathered in the barn. Or two. I'll be right there. I want to test the lights, Ethan said, stringing an extension cord to an outlet by the back wall. I'll stay and help, Olivia said, watching him secure the cable with electrical tape. Here, let me do that. She moved along with him, handing him strips of tape as they worked their way across the barn to the closest outlet. Moment of truth, Ethan said, inserting the plug. Olivia turned, expecting to see the tree in all its lit glory, but nothing happened. Did you plug it into the tree? Of course I did. Ethan pulled the plug from the outlet and reinserted it. Nothing happened. Olivia followed the cord to the tree. Sure enough, not one but 5 different strings of lights were plugged into the extension cord. All looks good here. She hoped these weren't those old-fashioned lights where nothing worked if one bulb was out. Or loose. Her father had spent many a December evening during her childhood, checking one after the other, his mood souring with each frustrating minute ticking by. It's got to be the fuse. Ethan stepped out of the barn. A moment later, the tree lit up, and she was the only person here to witness it. It looked splendid in all its decorated glory. Sure, the branches were a little sparse, but they'd fix that with treats for the kids that would double as decoration. The only thing missing was... Beautiful, isn't it? Ethan said, startling her. Olivia hadn't noticed him walk up behind her. She felt his warm breath on her neck and it sent shivers down her spine. Heat radiated off his body, making her too aware of his presence. It's getting there, but there's something missing. What's that? Ethan walked around her and circled the tree. He came to a stop when he was opposite of her, the tree almost blocking her view of the handsome farmer. A tree topper. I think I have just the thing, she said, a wide smile spreading across her face. If I can figure out where I packed it. I have faith in you, Ethan said, returning her smile. Ready for some coffee? You have no idea. Olivia picked up the pace, rushing back to the house. She had to get some distance between her and Ethan, or at least get a few other people around them, before those sparks flying between them set the hay in the barn on fire. Are you sure you're up for this? Chloe asked, looking from Zoe to Olivia. From what I hear, you were both busy all day decorating some immense tree at the Winters farm. I don't know about Olivia, but I'm definitely up for it. Then again, I ducked out early to run some errands. Besides, I brought wine. Zoe walked into the flower shop, Olivia following close behind. Where's Toby? Toby is my son, Chloe said to Olivia. He's spending the night with Amy and Chris. I'm sure they'll spoil him rotten. Which means we have all night to turn this store into something as magical as the Book Nook. Sophie walked out from behind the counter carrying a large board of crackers and cheese. Olivia smiled. The women weren't playing. Looks like you are prepared. The question is, are you? Zoe asked, putting the 2 bottles of red wine on the counter. When am I ever not ready to decorate for Christmas? Olivia grinned. This was exactly what she needed. Late January? Chloe asked. After you spend more time taking everything down than it took putting it all up. Olivia laughed. You might have a point there. Good thing it's still early in December. How did it go at the farm today? Sophie asked. I'm sorry, I couldn't make it out there this morning. Don't worry, we had plenty of help. Zoe got to work uncorking the first bottle of wine. Olivia did all the heavy lifting. I think your cousins did the heavy lifting, Olivia said, warmth creeping into her cheeks when she thought of Ethan carrying all those boxes for her. I'd say Ethan did most of it, and I still want to know what happened between the two of you in the barn after everyone else left. Don't think I didn't hear about that, Zoe said. She held up a hand when Olivia began to speak. Or the way you two kept glancing at each other back at the house? I'm surprised Ethan didn't prick his fingers more often than he did. Prick his fingers? I think we need a more detailed rundown of what's happening here, Sophie said, pouring the wine into 4 glasses. We were making popcorn and cranberry garlands. Ethan had a sharp sewing needle and pricked his fingers once or twice, Olivia said. She'd flinched every time she'd seen him do it, feeling sorry for the man. And what happened in the barn? Chloe asked. You can tell us. We're all friends here. Olivia grinned and shook her head. Nothing happened in the barn. All we did was test the lights. They work, by the way. That's good to know, Zoe said good-naturedly, popping a cracker into her mouth. Didn't you ask me here to help decorate the store? Olivia asked, keeping her tone light. In truth, she didn't mind the banter or the questions, but there was nothing to tell. Unfortunately. Maybe we should get started with that before we finish the first bottle of wine. Cho took a sip of hers. You're right. Where do you want to start? Olivia surveyed the space. She'd walked by the storefront yesterday and made a few sketches. Let's tackle the window displays first. I brought some spray-on snow and some cling film I've cut into tree silhouettes. We'll fill the space in between with all those beautiful poinsettias of yours. She rolled up her sleeves and dug into the large tote bag she'd carried in with her. They were deep into the second bottle of wine by the time she was happy with the results. This is amazing, Chloe said, admiring the work. It's a showstopper. Zoe's eyes were bright, as much from the wine as her excitement. You are a genius. Let's go see what it looks like from the outside. Sophie grabbed her jacket and opened the door. All 4 of them stepped outside, wrapped in their coats, and stepped across the street to admire their handiwork. The road was deserted, not a single person or car moving. The only sound on this frosty December night was the bell of the church several blocks away ringing. Olivia glanced at her phone. It was midnight, hours later than she thought. She should get home. Her alarm would ring in less than 7 hours, and she had stuff to do. It's even prettier from out here, Chloe said, taking a step back to admire the display in all its glory. That's the idea. Olivia smiled, pleased that her new friends liked it as much as she did. It was some of her best work and more enjoyable than she'd thought it would be. Maybe she should approach more stores in the area about holiday displays. It's great work, but let's get back inside. I'm cold. Sophie pulled her coat closer around herself. And I should probably head home soon. I promised Mason I'd open the gallery in the morning, Zoe said. He and his dad are going Christmas shopping. For you, no doubt. Chloe grinned and strode back to the door. She pulled on it, yanking harder when the handle didn't budge. Don't tell me, Zoe groaned. Tell you what? Olivia asked, hoping what she feared wasn't true. I think we locked ourselves out. Chloe giggled, then looked apologetic. Sorry. Do you have a spare key hidden around here somewhere? Sophie asked. Chloe shook her head. We could bust out a window. Zoe eyed the display they'd admired moments ago. Don't even think about it. That was too much work, Olivia said, pulling her phone from her jacket pocket. There's got to be a locksmith we can call. That'll take a while, though, Sophie said, raising the collar of her coat. Zoe walked over and huddled next to her, both of them seeking shelter from the wind in the doorway of the flower shop. I'm sure it will. At least that'll give Olivia a chance to tell us exactly what's going on with her and Ethan. You should have seen the way those two were looking at each other when they thought the other one wasn't paying attention. Olivia dialed the number to the local hardware store that listed after-hour locksmithing as one of the services provided and hoped she could get someone out here before she spilled the beans that she had taken a liking to the ex-fiancé of her former best friend. Or shared the whole complicated tale of how she first met Ethan Winter. Chapter 5. The wind is picking up, Daniel said, looking up into the sky where dark storm clouds loomed. I hope Mom and Dad don't have any trouble coming back home. Where are Aunt Maggie and Uncle Henry, anyway? Zoe asked. Mom talked Dad into a trip to Charleston to go Christmas shopping and look at the lights. I think they have something going on in the harbor too. Ethan shook his head. If it started pouring down icy rain, there wouldn't be much to see. He looked at his younger brother. Don't worry. Dad won't drive if the weather gets too bad. They'll hunker down until the worst of it is over. Let's hope you're right. Dad's eyesight isn't what it used to be, Daniel said. I'm more worried about all these lights and decorations making it through the night. Ethan watched a string of fairy lights break loose. It dangled from a branch for a few moments, before wrapping itself around an adjacent one. Do you think it'll be that bad? Olivia looked across the field and the adjacent forest. Lights were shining, illuminating a path that led around the property, finishing at the wide doors to the barn. I do, he said, hating the next words coming out of his mouth. I'm calling it. Let's bring it all in and reevaluate in the morning. Zoe groaned. Seriously? Daniel and I spent all morning stringing those lights up. Ethan shrugged. I don't think we have much of a choice. You're right. Olivia strode over to the closest candy cane and pulled it out of the ground. Let's get it done before we're all soaked. I think that'll happen no matter what, Zoe said. She wasn't wrong. Ethan's shirt stuck to his skin despite the jacket he was wearing, and his feet were squelching in his boots by the time he dropped the second load of decorations in the barn. He was chilled to the bone and sure the others weren't faring much better. Except Daniel. Decked out in some of his high-priced expedition gear, his little brother looked relatively comfortable. Let's head inside for a bit to warm up, Ethan said when he saw Olivia shivering. Even Zoe, who spent years in New York City, looked chilled, her lips taking on a purplish-blue tint that wasn't there before they got started on this rescue mission. Good thinking. I could use more coffee. Daniel led the way, motioning for the women to follow him. Ethan pulled the door to the barn shut behind him, securing them before joining the rest of the group. He was about to head inside when a familiar Oldsmobile pulled up the drive. Miss Doris, everything okay? He jogged over when her car came to a stop and opened the door for the older woman. I'm fine. The weather turned on us quickly. I hope this doesn't mean we have to cancel our plans for Friday. The kids would be so disappointed if this didn't work out either. Miss Doris followed him into the farmhouse. To tell you the truth, I think they are more excited about Christmas at the farm than they were about the concert. I'm glad to hear it. Ethan walked straight to the wood-burning stove in the kitchen, happy his brother had added a couple of extra logs already. The fire was crackling and burning, heat emanating from the heavy cast-iron piece that was the focal point of the room. Coffee will be done in a couple of minutes, Daniel called, pouring water into the coffee maker and flipping the switch. It couldn't come soon enough. Zoe walked into the room, drying her hair with a towel and handing a second one to Olivia, who accepted it gratefully. Miss Doris. Is something wrong? Why does everyone assume I need help? Miss Doris shook her head. I'm fine. Actually, I'm here to see you, Zoe. Mason has been trying to call you. There was an accident at the gallery. What happened? Is he okay? Zoe dropped her towel, her eyes wide with concern. He's fine. A tree fell and shattered one of the windows. He was hoping for a little help to move paintings out of the way and boarding up the window. He was heading to the hardware store when I ran into him, Miss Doris said. Zoe pulled her phone out of her back pocket and groaned. 3 missed messages. I'll head over there with her, Daniel said, pulling 2 stainless steel travel mugs from the cabinet above the coffee maker while Zoe walked off to return her boyfriend's calls. Take some tools, Ethan said. And call me if you need more help. Daniel poured coffee and added cream and sugar to both. Will do. I doubt it'll be necessary, though. Between the 3 of us, we should have it handled. Mason's dad's there too. Do we have any tarps to spare? Zoe asked, walking back into the room. There's a few in the garage and a couple of heavy-duty ones in the shed. Ethan motioned to the outbuilding that was barely visible from the window. I'll grab them. Daniel turned to Miss Doris. We'll follow you home, if you'd like. Make sure you make it back to your house, okay? Miss Doris waved him off. I'll be fine. I've driven through worse than this. Olivia, are you heading back? Olivia looked at him and grew quiet for a moment. What do we do if the rain doesn't stop? Or if it's too wet and muddy to drive the tractor around? Ethan leaned against the counter and thought for a moment. We could set up a winter wonderland inside the barn. Have the kids walk through tunnels of light and down Candy Cane Lane instead of driving them around the farm. That's a great idea. Olivia's bright blue eyes lit up. Ready to get started on that now? Why not? All the stuff is sitting in the barn already. Let me dry out and get some coffee in me, and I'll be good to go. He walked over and poured himself a cup. Olivia, Miss Doris? Coffee? Yes, please. Olivia joined him and took the filled cup. I'd better head back home and batten down the hatches. Be careful out there, Miss Doris said to everyone in the room. 5 minutes later, they were alone in the kitchen, sitting by the stove and sipping piping hot coffee. Do you have a pen and paper? Olivia asked, smiling brightly at him. I have some ideas for the barn I wouldn't mind sketching out. Setting things up in here was the right call, Ethan said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. It turned out cute. Olivia joined him, her hand brushing against his. It sent a pulse like lightning up his arm, matching the brilliant bolt outside that was followed by the loud boom of thunder. The woman beside him flinched. The kids will love it, he assured her. And having activities set up along the way is going to take it over the top. Ethan looked at the table they'd set up for cookie decorating and the stack of crates that would hold a hot chocolate bar. Any other brilliant ideas? Olivia laughed, the bright sound filling the old hay barn that was beginning to look like something from the North Pole. I'm full of them. Bring it on. He grinned at her, wondering if she'd continue to rise to the challenge. What they'd accomplished here in the past few hours while the storm raged outside was a small miracle. He couldn't wait to see what else Olivia had up the sleeves of her pretty green sweater. We could have them make marshmallow snowmen. You know, in case they're not hyped up on enough sugar by the time they get through the cookies and the cocoa. Olivia strode through the space, kicking a small hay bale to mark the spot for this new activity. And I saw these cute fluffy pom-poms online. If I can get a bunch of them shipped in time, we could set up an area for a snowball fight. Ethan looked around. It would have to be away from the tree and any of the most breakable decorations. I could rig something up in the far corner. I think we have some netting left that Mom uses to keep the wild rabbits out of her vegetable garden. It should hold some fluffy balls. Let's hope so. Olivia sat down on the hay bale. He pulled a second one over and joined her. Sounds like the worst of the storm is moving out. There might be enough of a break in the rain to risk a run back to the house without getting soaked again, he said. Can I interest you in dinner? Food would be nice, Olivia said. After that, I should probably head back and check on Miss Doris. I don't like the idea of her all alone in that big house of hers. Ethan laughed. Don't worry about her. She's ridden out more hurricanes in that place than I can count. She can take care of herself, and this is nothing more than an unexpected rainstorm. We get them in the summer all the time. At least then they're not ruining a perfect winter wonderland celebration for the kids, Olivia said, her lips twitching with amusement. Nope. They'll just ruin people's family vacation. He rose and held a hand out to help her up. Her fingers touched his, and he was glad that they were warm. Between the small electric heater he'd brought in and the warmth from the lights they'd strung all over the place, the barn was staying plenty warm. More importantly, it was dry. Unlike the rest of the farm, the deluge had done more damage than he'd expected. Have you heard anything from your parents? Olivia asked as they waited across the drive to the house. Or Zoe? Nothing from Zoe, but I'm sure they are fine. Daniel would have called if they needed help. Ethan unlocked the back door and ushered her inside. My parents decided to stay in Charleston. My brother lives there and they're spending the night with him. Mark, right? I like him. Olivia kicked off her wet shoes. Ethan nodded. He's the smart one. An astronomer who works for some aerospace company in Charleston. Impressive. Olivia turned to stare at him, looking anything but impressed. Her lip twitched. I should go check on the cows and the goats, Ethan said, biting back a grin of his own. Are you okay by yourself for a bit here? Coming with you. Olivia pulled her shoes back on. I wish you'd told me before I took these off, though. She fumbled with the soaked laces. There's no need. I'm just going to make sure everyone is fed and there are no issues, Ethan said. Something he should have done earlier. A few of the cows were close to calving their winter offspring, and storms like the one that had been raining on their parade all day were notorious for sending them into early labor. I'm coming with you. It'll get done faster with an extra pair of hands. Lead the way and tell me what you need me to do, Olivia said, stepping around him and opening the door. The quicker we get this done, the quicker you can get into that pretty kitchen and cook me dinner. Chapter 6. That doesn't look good. Olivia looked down the driveway and out to the road. Or what was left of it. I don't see how we missed it when we came in from the barn. We had our back to it. Besides, this looks fresh. It could have happened while we were inside. Ethan took a few steps down the gravel drive for a better look. Olivia followed. The area was dimly lit between the light from the house and a few street lights at the end of the road. Lights that flickered and then went off. Great. No power. Just what we need. Ethan turned and rushed toward the goat barn with Olivia in tow, stumbling in the pitch black. Ethan stopped and held out a hand for her, using his phone to light the way. I have a couple of flashlights in the barn. Sure, you don't want to wait in the house? I'm sure. Tell me what to do. She let him lead her and together they made sure the goats had plenty of food, water, and fresh straw for warmth. Do you think the babies will be okay in the dark? She asked. Ethan smiled. They are fine. If we had newborns, it would be a different story. I like to keep a heat lamp on them for a few days to make sure they don't get chilled, but these guys? They are fine. What's next? Olivia asked, returning the feed scoop and picking her flashlight back up. We'll do the same for the cows. And after that, I'm making us something to eat, Ethan promised. Without power? Olivia asked, her stomach grumbling at the thought of food. I can whip something up on the wood stove. It won't be anything fancy, but it'll hit the spot. And we'll have plenty of fresh milk. He stepped outside, securing the door to the goat shed when she followed him. We're milking cows? Olivia asked, feeling excited. I will. And don't worry. We only have one of them in milk right now. Which is a good thing since the milk machine doesn't work without power. No generator? Olivia asked. We have one for emergencies, but it's not worth cranking that old thing up to milk one cow. With a little luck, power will be back in a couple of hours, Ethan said as they made their way across the property. I guess they have plenty of practice with this kind of thing, Olivia said. With hurricanes and such. Ethan nodded. That they do. Let's check on the maternity ward first. Say what? Olivia thought she must have misheard the man. We have a couple of cows close to delivery. Winter babies mean plenty of milk for us in the spring. Ethan pulled the door to the larger cow barn open. The sound of large animals moving around and calling out greeted them. Sounds like everyone's hungry, Olivia said, stepping inside, shining her flashlight around to get a feel for the large space. It was bigger than the hay barn they'd worked in. She counted a total of 10 cows. They always are. We'll feed them after I check on the pregnant ones. He strode to the far end of the barn. 2 cows stood in individual stalls, staring at them with big brown eyes. Moo. Hey there, Mama, you are looking pretty uncomfortable. Olivia walked over and slowly reached out her hand to scratch the large bovine on the head. Ethan stepped inside, rubbing the cow's back. She's got at least a few more days. He fed and watered her before moving on to the next stall. How about her? Olivia asked, following him but staying on the outside of the stall. Betsy here is a different story. I think she's going to calf tonight or first thing tomorrow at the latest. Ethan ran his hand across the back of the cow one more time. Why are you doing this? Olivia asked. The ligaments loosen in preparation for labor. You can feel it up here. There are divots next to her spine, Ethan said. Would you like to feel? Olivia thought about it for a moment. It won't bother her? She's pretty calm right now. You should be good. He held open the gate and Olivia stepped inside. Ethan took her hand and guided it to the place he'd touched before. Feel that? Olivia nodded. This close to the cow, she could also see the ripples of what had to be small contractions. Or maybe it was the calf moving inside. Either way, it was an incredible feeling. It'll be a few hours before she goes into active labor. Let's get the chores done and grab some food while we can, Ethan said. Any chance you'll teach me how to milk? Olivia asked. It's something I've always wanted to try. It's not as easy as it looks, Ethan warned. I'm up for the challenge if you are, she said, grinning at him. All right. But first we muck out the stalls. Ethan returned her smile, his brown eyes sparkling in dim illumination from their flashlights, before handing her a pitchfork. You're a natural, Ethan said, raising a glass of fresh milk. Olivia laughed and took a sip. It tasted good. Sweet, creamy. The perfect addition to the omelet Ethan had prepared in a cast-iron skillet on the wood stove that kept her toasty warm. Thanks. And thank you for this. Ethan smiled, cutting into his own dish. It isn't much, but it's hot and we're dry. Olivia pulled the oversized sweatshirt he'd given her over her knees. She wore them along with a pair of leggings she was pretty sure belonged to Zoe and a pair of oversized wool socks. It's delicious. Thank you. Ethan looked more relaxed than she'd seen him, despite the fact that they were basically trapped on the farm with no electricity. Or maybe that was the reason he seemed at ease in this situation. Like he would have done well in an era before power, phones, and all the creature comforts she'd come to rely on. What was it like growing up here? Olivia asked, curious about the handsome man sitting across from her. Ethan laughed. It was busy. 4 boys and a bunch of critters. We spent more time outside than here in the house. Which was probably a good thing. It sounds like a great way to grow up. She pictured him and his brothers running through fields, their trusty dogs by their side. Probably ancestors of the black lab that was curled up by the fireplace. The dog was never far from his side. It was. How about you? You grew up in Boston? Ethan asked. Olivia nodded, taking another bite to buy herself a little time. I did. We mostly lived in town. No backyards, but plenty of public parks. And museums, theaters. And let's not forget about all the history up there. You basically lived in the birthplace of our nation, Ethan said. You know how it is. When you live in a place, you rarely do the touristy thing, Olivia said. Aside from school trips, of course. Speaking of school, where did you go to college? Ethan asked. Boston University. I got my degree in interior design there. You? She looked at him, pushing back her empty plate. Clemson. I got my master's in agriculture before coming back here. Impressive. A master's degree. What does one learn about agriculture at university? Olivia asked. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What does one learn about interior design? Throw pillow 101? Touché, Olivia said. Let's change the subject. What did you do for fun in Clemson? Mostly a lot of hiking and playing dandy, Ethan said. It's not exactly a party school. We had plenty of that at BU. Olivia thought about the many parties she'd attended throughout her 5 years there. It was a great way to make friends. I'm sure it was. Ethan's voice grew serious. Can I ask you something? I thought that's what we were doing. Getting to know each other. She smiled at him encouragingly. Right. This might get awkward though, he said. And you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Spit it out, Ethan. Olivia was wondering what had brought on the change in mood. She'd enjoyed their easy banter moments ago. How did you and Sarah meet? Freshman year. There was a welcome event for our dorm. She looked like fun and we hit it off. Shared interests and all that, Olivia said, watching Ethan carefully. His face was closed. Unreadable. Shared interests? Mostly fashion and design. Let's say we did a lot of shopping together. Olivia looked around the room, trying to come up with something to change the subject. Speaking of shopping, did you finish getting everything for Christmas? Getting there. My brother James is notoriously hard to shop for, Ethan said, a smile returning to his lips. Lips she found herself looking at a little too often during their time together here, sharing a simple dinner by candlelight. Anything I can do to help? Olivia asked. Maybe something nostalgic? What was his favorite present as a child? That one's easy. A puppy. One of Shadow's relatives, actually. The dog raised his head at the mention of his name. I'm guessing that's not an option this year, Olivia said. Ethan shook his head. How about you? What was your favorite present? Aside from a puppy, she said when she saw him look at his dog. Probably my dirt bike. Ethan's eyes blazed. Interesting. There is an adventurous side to you. Olivia liked the idea of him racing through the woods on a bike. It was a sexy image of the handsome guy who was sneaking his way into her heart. There is. Nothing like my brother Daniel, but I enjoy a bit of a thrill from time to time. He glanced up at the grandfather clock in the corner. We should go check on Betsy. Olivia remembered that was the cow in labor. You don't happen to have a dry pair of shoes I could borrow? He got up and sat their plates in the sink. It's a farm. We have extra muck boots everywhere. She shrugged into her jacket and followed him to the back door. Ethan handed her a pair of black rubber boots, pulling on a second pair himself, before they headed out to the barn. Olivia could tell something was wrong the moment they walked up to Betsy's stall. The cow was making sounds she could only describe as disturbing moans. One look at Ethan's concerned face confirmed her suspicions. Is she going to be okay? I hope so. I should have come out to check on her sooner. Ethan stepped inside, running his hands across the protruding belly. The calf is stuck. She might need some help. Before Olivia could wonder about how you helped a cow during the birthing process, he jumped into action, asking for her help as he pulled the calf out in time with the cow's contractions. It took a lot more force than Olivia expected and wasn't anything like the romantic experience she'd imagined watching a baby cow being born would be. It was messy, dirty, and if she was perfectly honest, brutal. Until the newborn slipped out and took its first breath. Betsy, checking on her offspring and licking him clean, looked as exhausted as Olivia felt. "They'll both make it," Ethan said, cleaning his hands on a bundle of straw before walking over to the sink to wash up. "I'm glad." Olivia rubbed the back of her neck and suppressed a yawn. "That was something else." "Not how you expected to spend tonight?" Ethan asked. Olivia laughed. The sound that came out of her mouth was short and tired. A sound of relief more than anything else. "Not exactly. I'm glad I'm here though." She rinsed off and splashed a bit of cold water on her face. "We should stick around until the baby nurses. After that, we can leave them both to rest." Ethan walked back and looked over the gate at mother and calf. Olivia joined him, stepping close to get a better look. To her amazement, the calf that was barely 10 minutes old tried to get to its feet. She gasped when its front legs buckled and turned to look at Ethan. "Don't worry. He'll get it," he said with a warm smile. "He?" Olivia asked. "A little boy calf. He looks good," he said. "What's his name?" Olivia asked. "Good question. Do you have any ideas?" Ethan turned to look at her. Olivia thought for a moment, studying the small bovine in front of her. "He looks like a Humphrey." Ethan harumphed and turned to look at the calf. "Humphrey works." "What will happen to Humphrey?" Olivia asked, wondering what happened to calves that didn't grow up to be milk cows. "He has good genetics. We might raise him to replace his father as the sire of the herd down the road," Ethan said. Relief flooded Olivia. She liked the idea of the animal staying on the Winters farm. It seemed like a good place if you were an animal. They stood there, quietly watching the little guy struggling to get to his feet. Betsy nudged and licked him, encouraging him to keep going. And eventually he did. Moments later, he found his source of nourishment and had his first meal. Joy filled Olivia's heart, and when she turned to look at Ethan, he was staring back at her, amazement in his eyes. His expression shifted, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, Olivia thought he would bend down and kiss her. To her surprise, she didn't mind. Not one bit. Then he blinked and stepped back. "It's late. We should get some sleep." Chapter 7. Anybody ready to meet the goats? Ethan looked across the crowd of 6- and 7-year-olds in front of him. Every single child was vibrating with excitement. All the sugary treats and the bright lights didn't help. He remembered the feeling well. It made it a little more challenging to have them around animals, which was why he'd decided to take them to the goat enclosure in small groups. At least 10 arms shot in the air. "Are they baby goats?" a little girl asked. "I heard they are teeny tiny." "They are small and some of them are still young," he said. "I guess you could call them teenage goats." "Oh." The girl's face fell. "I'll take you over there 3 at a time," Ethan said, wondering how he'd sort them into groups and hoping the girl in her bright red sweater would cheer up once she saw the herd. "Do you guys work on the buddy system?" Olivia walked over. The children had taken to the beautiful young woman right away and were nodding their heads. "Could we take 4 at a time?" Ethan met her gaze. "If you join me, we can handle 4 of them." At least he hoped with her help he could keep everyone on their best behavior. The last thing he wanted was to spook the goats. His mother would have his hide if anything happened to her babies. "I can do that." Olivia beamed up at him, the same way she had 2 nights ago when they stood in the cow barn, watching Humphrey take his first steps. "Great. How do we sort them?" He looked at her for guidance. Despite the fact that they had children on the farm all summer long, he wasn't particularly comfortable around them. And usually their parents were present. Olivia turned to face the children. "Everyone, find your buddy and hold hands." To his surprise, the kids followed her directions without question, pairing up 2 by 2. She pointed to 2 of the pairs. "You 4 are coming with us. The rest of you, go play. It'll be your turn as soon as we get back." "How will we know you're back?" a boy with red hair and a face full of freckles asked. "I'll come find you," Ethan said when Olivia looked stumped. That seemed to appease him, and he and his small group of friends ran off. Olivia laughed. "This really turned out well, didn't it? They seem to be having a good time, don't they?" He looked around, taking it all in and seeing it through the eyes of the excited youngsters. "You've really outdone yourself." Mark walked over and put his arm around Ethan's shoulder. "It's going well, isn't it?" He grinned, feeling pleased with their efforts and the enjoyment it seemed to bring to everyone attending the Winter's Farm Winter Festival. "When did you get here?" 5 minutes ago. Mom and Dad told me about it when they were stuck spending the night with me this week. I figured I'd see what I could do to help after the storm. Looks like you have it handled." Mark clapped him on the shoulder and turned to look at the kids involved in an epic fake snowball battle. "We do. Thanks to Olivia." "This was all her," Ethan said, fully aware that she was standing within easy hearing distance. The snowball fight was her idea too. It had turned out to be the chief attraction so far. He'd been unconvinced that it would work, but despite their fluff, the globes had a good heft to them, and he and Daniel had tried them out last night, much to their mother's chagrin. "It looks like fun." Mark's eyes blazed and Ethan could tell his brother was itching to try it himself. "Go give it a whirl. Olivia and I will take these 4 out to visit with the goats. We'll be back in a few." Ethan turned to look for his extra pair of eyes and ears. She was standing right behind him, the 4 children lined up and ready to go. They looked innocent, standing there, holding hands with their buddy, but Ethan knew all that good behavior would be out the window the moment they set foot in the goat barn. "Don't be too long," his mother said in passing. She was wearing a Mrs. Santa Claus costume, complete with white hair wig and a deep red bonnet that looked like something from a Christmas cartoon. "You know who will make an appearance in 20 minutes? We better get going then," Ethan said to his small group of holiday adventurers. "To see the baby goats?" Braids asked. "Pygmy goats, but yes, we'll go see them." He held out his hand and the young girl took it. Their small group made it up to the goat barn, him leading the way, Olivia bringing up the rear. As he'd expected, the kids squealed and reached into the pens to pet the goats as soon as they entered the barn. He distracted them by flipping the switch that turned on the lights he and Daniel hung last night. Colorful strings of bulbs crossed the ceiling in rows, well out of reach of the curious goats. Deck the halls played from the wireless speakers his brother had installed. Ethan turned to look at Olivia. Her eyes were wide, and she looked as charmed and surprised as the children. "Did you guys know that goats love music?" Ethan asked. "Why don't you sing to them?" He started and everyone joined in. By the time they made it to the second fa la 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 la, even the goats got in on the caroling, joining with their chorus of bass. Ho, 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 Ethan's father, dressed in a plush red coat and matching hat with a large burlap sack slung over his shoulder, strode into the barn, their largest billy goat by his side. "Henry makes a great Santa Claus," Miss Doris said. "You sound surprised." Ethan looked at the older woman, dressed in dark slacks and a kitschy Christmas sweater that had Santa sipping hot cocoa printed on it. "I didn't think he had it in him. I might have to borrow him for an event at the library next week." Her steel gray eyes sparkled like the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. She looked almost as excited as the children running around them, trying to get closer to the big man. "Good luck with that," Ethan said, not trying to hide his amusement. "It took my mother making her famous pot roast to talk him into actually doing this." "Oh, don't worry. I have a few aces up my sleeve. I happen to know your father has a bit of a sweet tooth." Miss Doris grinned and sauntered off, no doubt already planning how she was going to bribe Henry Winter into doing her bidding. "She's right, though," Olivia said, stepping up beside him. "About what?" Ethan asked, moving to look at her. Your dad makes a great Santa. Olivia stepped back to let a group of children through. Ethan followed her, finding himself in the far corner of the barn, away from the crowd. It was quiet, almost private. A nice break from the hustle and bustle of excited little ones who'd had too much sugar and had lots of energy to work off. You look like you're having fun, Ethan said, warmth spreading through him like a big gulp of hot cocoa on a cold winter's day at the sight of the smile on Olivia's face. She mirrored the joy unfolding all around them. I am, she said, her attention focusing on him. How about you? I am. And he could think of something that would make him even happier than bringing Christmas cheer to the under-10 crowd of Palmar Island. Ethan took a step to close the distance between them. Thank you for your help with all of this, he said, reaching up to cup her face. You're welcome. Her breath hitched, and she focused on him and him alone. All he could see and feel was her. Olivia. He hesitated for a single heartbeat, the memory of past pain and betrayal flashing through his mind. He shoved it away and lowered his head, ready to claim her lips. To finally find out what she would taste like, what it would feel like to touch those pink lips of hers, to have her press her warm body against his. Ethan? A familiar voice from behind interrupted him, sending all thoughts of kisses out the wide barn door. He turned to see a tall blonde standing less than 5 feet away from them. Her presence cast a shadow that extinguished the joy he'd felt a moment ago and caught him completely off guard. Sarah? Olivia asked, sounding as surprised and stunned as he felt. Ethan stepped away, needing at least a little distance between himself and both of the women. What had seemed like a cozy corner away from the crowd suddenly felt like a trap. No, he felt trapped, cornered by the woman who had left him at the altar 6 months ago. What are you doing here? Ethan asked. Chapter 8. Ethan? Olivia looked at the man who'd been about to kiss her. His eyes were wide, and she was pretty sure her own stunned expression mirrored his. Can I talk to you for a moment? Sarah asked, her eyes only on Ethan. She had yet to acknowledge Olivia. In private. Ethan shook his head ever so slightly, as if to dispel the shock of seeing the woman he'd planned to marry this past summer. Olivia felt a completely inappropriate giggle rise in her chest and coughed to keep it from escaping, making the awkward situation worse. Olivia, do you mind giving us a moment? Sarah asked, her tone firm and tense. I'll be right over here if you need me, she said to Ethan, putting a hand on his arm to reassure him before stepping out into the hustle and bustle of the barn. It was hard to fight the urge to eavesdrop on their conversation, but Olivia had been raised better than that. She focused her attention on the celebration in front of her. Everything okay? Zoe asked, walking up to her, Mason by her side. Of course. Where did all those books come from? Olivia asked, watching the children rip open the presents Santa Henry was handing out to them. Sophie and her husband donated them, Zoe said. The teachers got very excited when they heard about it. I think the verdict on what the kids think is still out. Olivia laughed. They'll appreciate them once they get into the stories. And look, a few of them are reading. That would have been me, Mason said, putting an arm around his girlfriend. I can see that. Zoe beamed at him and, as much as Olivia enjoyed seeing her new friend happy and in love, it made her wonder what was going on behind her. She heard hushed voices behind her, and from the tone of it, things weren't going well between Ethan and Sarah. Olivia busied herself by cleaning up the wrapping paper that was strewn across the floor of the barn, before helping Miss Doris take down the marshmallow snowman and hot chocolate stations as the kids left, taking the bus back to school in time for pickup. I think everyone had a good time, Mrs. Winter said, looking pleased but tired. They did. We made a real difference in these children's lives. Olivia watched the last of them exit the barn. The little girl with the braids turned for one last look at the winter wonderland they'd created inside the rustic building. She raised her hand and waved, before rushing off to catch up with her peers. We did. It might take me a year to recover from this, though. Santa Henry sat down on a hay bale, rubbing his back. You'd think farm chores would be harder than giving a bunch of kids a good time. Are you saying this won't be a new annual tradition? Miss Doris asked, looking as fit as a fiddle. She stacked cups into a bin to take them to the farmhouse to wash. Let's revisit the idea after the first of the year, Mrs. Winter said, joining Miss Doris, leaving the rest of them to take down decorations. Where is Sarah? Olivia asked when she joined Ethan at the far end of the barn. He was collecting the myriad of fake snowballs that were scattered all over the place. A few of them had made it all the way up to the rafters of the structure. She left. We're supposed to meet for dinner later. Ethan didn't look at her. He kept his head down, picking up snowballs and tossing them into a wooden crate. Oh. She tried to keep the hurt out of her voice. Looking around for more of the fluffy balls, she kept her hands busy, picking up as many of them as she could hold. She says she needs my help. Ethan threw a snowball up in the air and caught it. With what? Olivia asked, dumping balls into the crate. She is attending a holiday party in Prince George. Her boss will be there. Ethan stood still, watching her carefully. She didn't mention that she broke off our engagement. As far as everyone she's working with is concerned, we're still engaged. That's weird. And not really his problem. Sarah asked me to join her, he said. To pose as her fiancé and impress her boss. Why? Olivia still didn't see the point of this. To secure a promotion. Ethan shrugged. And you're thinking about doing it? Olivia asked, keeping her tone neutral. I'm considering it. If you'd be okay with it. He threw the snowball into the crate. Why wouldn't I? Olivia asked. It's not like we're seeing each other. Ethan walked over and took her hand. That's not exactly true. At least not as far as I'm concerned. All of this is still new, and I know I haven't been as open and upfront as I should have been. She looked down at their intertwined hands, feeling stunned. This was not where she saw their conversation going. I would like to see you. Take you out, he said. If that's something you'd be interested in. I would be. Olivia smiled up at him. Good. He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. Before I do, we should talk about Sarah. All right. Olivia tried not to look or feel defensive. Part of me feels obligated to help her. She could lose the opportunity to get the job she's always wanted. If that's how you feel, do it. It's one party, right? Olivia said, ignoring the alarm bells that went off in the back of her head. One holiday party, and she'll be on her way to wherever she calls home these days. Ethan squeezed her hand. And dinner with her tonight, Olivia said. Ethan nodded. Quick and casual. Burgers at Mary's Diner. You're welcome to join us. Olivia shook her head. I don't think that's a good idea. I'll call you after, Ethan promised. For now, I don't want to think about anything but this. He pulled her close, hesitating for just a moment. Olivia felt his eyes scanning her face and sensed that he was giving her a chance to back away. To stop him from finishing what they'd started before his ex had waltzed back into their lives. Me, neither, she breathed, raising to her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck. Ethan dipped his head and brushed his lips across hers. Teasing, taking his time and making her smile. He kissed the corner of her mouth, where it was lifted in silent amusement. Her lips parted, and it was all the invitation he needed. Deepening their kiss, she felt his hard body press against her, erasing any trace of space there had been between them until now. In the semi-privacy of the far end of the barn, she lost herself in the kiss she'd waited for. The kiss that had almost happened twice. The kiss she never wanted to end. I heard the two of you lit up the barn after the winter festival, Chloe said, taking a sip of her peppermint mocha. They looked like they needed to get a room. Zoe grinned good-naturedly. If you ask me, it was about time. Maybe Sarah showing up was the push Ethan needed. Sophie took a bite of a slice of the roasted beans' famous gingerbread. I don't know about that. Olivia looked around at her small group of friends. Sarah talked Ethan into going to a holiday party her boss was attending, Zoe explained. Why? Chloe asked, looking from Zoe to Olivia. Her boss thinks she's still engaged to be married. Olivia shrugged. Chloe put down her cup and stared at her wide-eyed. First of all, why is that Ethan's problem? And second, she raised 2 fingers, isn't that deceptive? It is, but he wanted to help her. Olivia didn't agree either, but it wasn't her call to make. It wasn't like she and Ethan were officially in a relationship. It sounds like she's qualified for the job and worked hard for years to get this opportunity. Why should some old guy's outdated value system keep her from being able to move up? I see your point. Chloe nodded. I guess we all can use a helping hand every now and again. I never would have had the chance to take over the flower shop if Amy hadn't taken a chance on giving a single mom a job. Besides, it's one party. What's the harm in that? Ethan probably had some fancy food, a couple of drinks. Zoe waved her hand like it was no big deal. A bit of fun. Olivia coughed, catching the attention of all 3 of her friends. Spill, Chloe said in a tone that got the attention of the other coffee shop patrons. Her boss asked Sarah to join him and his wife for dinner at Chez Paul's to discuss her contract. Olivia sighed. Ethan had shared the news when he'd called her after the holiday party. I have a bad feeling about this, Sophie said, sitting back and looking at Olivia with concern in her eyes. What if she keeps doing this? And why did she show up here in the first place? She could have brought any fake date to that party. Good point, Zoe said. I guess Ethan was the easy choice when Sarah found out the party was just outside Palmar Island. It left a foul taste in Olivia's mouth, and the last thing she would have wanted to do in the other woman's situation was to face the man and his family. But she wasn't Sarah, and Ethan had chosen to help her out. Did you tell Ethan how much this is bothering you? Sophie asked softly. Olivia shook her head. How could she? We barely know each other. We're not even officially dating. I'm in no position to tell him what he can and can't do. But you can tell him how you feel, Zoe said. Or I can talk to him. No thanks, Olivia said. The idea made her smile. We're not in middle school. I'll bring it up. When? Chloe asked, clearly embracing her role as the pushy, protective friend. I'm meeting him right after this, to go thrift shopping. If the opportunity arose, she'd bring it up. Good. That cousin of mine better stand up for you and send his ex on her merry way, Zoe said. And just between us, Uncle Henry never liked her. Good to know. Olivia finished the last of her coffee and rose. Thank you. I mean it. Her friends were keeping her sane during these busy days before Christmas. As she walked out the door of the coffee shop, her phone buzzed. Glancing down, she saw something she didn't expect. A text from her mom inviting her home for the holidays. Chapter 9. Are we looking for anything in particular? Ethan asked when they entered the large thrift store in Myrtle Beach. The place was a little overwhelming. It was the size of a warehouse filled with everything from old shoes and books to any type of dish and glassware in existence. Olivia turned her head, scanning the vast space. Anything classy that would work in one of those fancy vacation homes in Prince George. Ethan thought about the place where he'd spent 3 of the most miserable hours of his life, pretending to be Sarah's fiancée. The woman had played the part perfectly, acting the entire time like nothing had happened and she hadn't walked out on him. She even wore the ring she'd insisted he buy when he'd first proposed to her. Not his grandmother's ring, but something new he'd barely been able to afford. It was the reason he still drove his old truck, hoping it would hold out another season. Ethan looked around, drawing a blank. Can you be a little more specific? Give me some examples? Let's see. Crystal vases and bowls with nice shapes and classic designs are always a good bet. Olivia strode confidently through the narrow aisles of the crowded store, her eyes scanning the shelves. It's a little late in the season for Christmas ornaments and decorations, but you never know. How about this? He held up a metal lantern that caught his eye. It was something his mother would enjoy. That could work. A coat of white paint, a nice pillar candle. Good find. Olivia smiled at him. Glad I could help. He had a little extra pep in his step as they made their way through the store. This may sound like a strange question, but why do you love Christmas so much? Do I? Olivia shot back, her eyes blazing with excitement. You do. Ethan grinned. Enough to make it your career. You're not wrong. And yes, I love it. Olivia grew quiet for a moment. I think it's because decorating the house, spending all day looking for the perfect ornament, listening to holiday music on repeat, those weren't things I got to do very much growing up. How come? Ethan asked. Olivia shrugged. Lots of reasons. Some years it was because my parents were too busy fighting to do much for Christmas. Some years there was little to no money for decorations or gifts. I guess I'm making up for lost time. Nothing wrong with that. He held up a punch bowl that looked like something from the 70s. Olivia shook her head. He followed her to the next section, where something in a beat-up cardboard box caught her attention. Cookie cutters? He asked, surprised she was interested in something so simple. His mother had an entire collection hidden away in a drawer in their large kitchen. Copper ones. These would make some adorable ornaments. Olivia held up a gingerbread man one and examined it carefully under the glare of the store's neon lights. If you say so. He had his doubts. Olivia laughed. Trust me, I can make this work. Besides, I have a sweet spot for these. Probably because I never got the chance to bake and decorate Christmas cookies. The matter-of-fact statement made Ethan pause. Never? Some of his favorite childhood memories were of making cookies with his mother and brothers. They'd make a mess of the kitchen and then eat enough warm cookies to get a bellyache. Never. It's been just me the past few years at Christmas. Seems silly to bake and decorate cookies if there's no chance you can eat them all. Olivia grew wistful. You could give them to friends and neighbors. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would love a plate of homemade cookies, Ethan said. You know what? You're right. As soon as I get my own place, I'm baking sugar cookies, Olivia said. And I'm getting these. They had barely stepped out of the store and onto the wide sidewalk a block from the beach when Ethan spotted a familiar sight. Ethan, what are you doing here? Sarah asked. Shopping with Olivia. He looked past her and bit back a groan when he saw Mr. and Mrs. Braxton walking up behind Sarah. Ethan, it's nice to see you again. I thought you were busy managing the family farm. Mr. Braxton shook his hand and eyed Olivia suspiciously. I'm sure Ethan is taking a quick break from important business to show his cousin Olivia around, Sarah said, walking up and linking her arm with his. Right, honey? Ethan glanced at Olivia. Right. Olivia, this is Mr. Braxton, Sarah's boss, and his lovely wife. It's nice to see both of you again. We're excited to see you for dinner tonight, Mrs. Braxton said with a friendly smile. I hear good things about the French restaurant. It's amazing. The best place on the island, Sarah said, pressing closer against his side. It's where Ethan proposed. It was the truth and also the only time he'd set foot in the place. Sarah had insisted on having dinner there for their one-year dating anniversary and dropped enough hints that she was expecting a ring that he'd succumb to the pressure and popped the question. How lovely. I can't wait. Will your cousin be joining us for dinner tonight? Mrs. Braxton asked. Her husband eyed all three of them, with brows drawn together. She won't. Olivia has other plans, Sarah said quickly. Speaking of which, I should probably head back to the island, Olivia said, taking the bag Ethan had insisted on carrying. If you'll excuse me, Ethan said, stepping away from Sarah. I'm her ride. Not without a kiss. Sarah pointed to her cheek. Ethan brushed his lips over her for a split second and took his leave, jogging to catch up with Olivia. "I'm sorry about all that," Ethan said when they'd made it out of the busy center of Myrtle Beach and headed south on Highway 17, back toward Palmar Island. "I didn't expect to run into them." "Neither did I," Olivia said. She was quiet, looking out the passenger window at the landscape passing by. "One more dinner, and Sarah will have her job, her boss will leave, and you and I can enjoy the rest of the holiday season together," Ethan said, keeping his eyes on the road in front of them. "That sounds nice." Olivia didn't sound convinced. Sarah was crossing the line, past what he'd agreed to, Ethan realized. Her request for a kiss had caught him by surprise. As had everything since the woman had blown back into his life days ago. It was time to draw a line in the sand with her. That, or he'd risk losing Olivia. "We need to talk," Ethan said when he picked up Sarah for dinner. "You look nice." She leaned in to adjust his tie, getting closer than she needed to be. He smelled her familiar perfume, the scent leaving him cold, like the rest of the woman. "Sarah, I'm serious. We need to talk. This is the last time I'm pretending to be engaged to you." Ethan stepped back and moved his tie to loosen the choke hold she'd created. "That's not going to work. Braxton likes you. He wants to spend more time with you. Maybe come out to the farm and have you show him the operation." "Sarah, there's no operation. It's a family farm. You know this." Ethan grew exasperated. "It is for now, but like I told him, the place has a lot of potential. With his connections." "Stop. I wasn't interested in expanding the farm or turning it into some fancy brand when we were together. I'm definitely not going to discuss it now." "Don't be like that. We're good together, you and I," Sarah said, walking to the luxury rental car she'd insisted on taking to the restaurant. His truck was parked beside it. "There is no you and I," Ethan said, opening the door for her when she stood next to the passenger door, dangling the keys to the Lexus for him. "But there could be." Sarah held up her hand, the engagement ring catching the light of a street lamp. "Sarah, that ship has sailed. I'm going to dinner tonight, but that's it." "And I expect that back," Ethan said, pointing to the ring. "You play your cards right and make a good impression tonight." "I just might," Sarah said, her tone changing from flirty to ice cold in the matter of a heartbeat. "And just so we're clear, I expect you to keep up this little charade of ours until the Braxtons leave here. Don't and watch what I'll do to Olivia's budding new business. I know what she's been up to, and trust me, I made enough connections here on the island to destroy everything she's built with nothing but a handful of phone calls." Chapter 10. She did what? Olivia couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Sarah has been calling people all across the island and down in Prince George, telling them that she's worked with you in the past. That you've cancelled contracts at the last minute and left people hanging right before the holidays or at important dinner parties," Zoe said. She even had the audacity to give fake references. "That's ridiculous. I've never cancelled a contract in my life." Olivia shook her head, trying to digest what she heard. It explained the strange phone conversation she had this morning with a client who'd changed their mind on a complete home holiday decorating she had on the books for next November. It had been a sad start to her day, but Olivia had written it off as something that happened. Now she wondered if there was more to it. It's not the only rumor she's been spreading. Sarah is telling people you're the reason she and Ethan broke off their engagement and that you've been writing bad checks. Zoe's eyes were blazing with rage. She said what? Olivia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Sarah is telling everyone not to rely on you getting things done on time because people you work with walk out all the time because you don't pay them. Zoe shook her head. I have half a mind to go find her and have a chat with her. Olivia sat back in her chair, intense feelings of hate and resentment rushing through her. Oh, there's no need. Sarah and I are going to talk. As soon as we're done here. She pulled out her phone and sent a text, grateful she still had her former friend's number on her phone. Do you want backup? Chloe asked, glancing at the clock on the wall. Nope. I've got this. To her relief, she had a reply from Sarah before they'd finished lunch, and the other woman agreed to meet her for coffee at the Roasted Bean. Thank you for meeting me. Olivia sat down, a cup of plain black coffee in front of her. Sarah was waiting for her, sipping on a gingerbread latte. Of course. It's what friends do. Friends don't spread false rumors about each other, Olivia said, figuring she might as well get straight to the point. Excuse me? Sarah sat up and crossed her arms. I've heard what you're doing, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped. I was not the reason you and Ethan broke off your engagement. You walked out on him. And I don't write bad checks, Olivia said. Sarah shrugged, relaxing her pose. It's not my fault people are making assumptions. Besides, Ethan and I have been reconnecting. I wouldn't be surprised if the engagement would be back on. She put her hand on the table, making sure the overhead light caught the diamond that was gracing her ring finger. Olivia closed her eyes for a split second. It took everything in her to keep calm. Sarah knew how to push someone's buttons. It was a trait Olivia remembered from their days in school together. You kept the ring? She asked instead. Of course. Good thing I did too. It took me ages to design this, and even longer to convince Ethan to go with this instead of that antique he'd picked out. Sarah shook her head, disbelief in her eyes. Isn't it customary to return the ring if you break off the engagement? Olivia asked. Sarah shrugged and took a sip of her drink. Like I said, I had a feeling we'd be back together. Except you're not. Ethan pretended to be with you so you could get your promotion and be on your merry way, Olivia said. When are you leaving, by the way? I'm not sure yet. It all depends. Sarah smiled, but there was a challenge in her eyes. Just so we're clear, Olivia said, sitting her cup down with enough force that some of the coffee sloshed out of the plain porcelain cup. Ethan isn't interested in getting back together with you. He's into me. And you are going to stop lying about how I conduct my business. Or what? Sarah asked, sitting up and staring right at Olivia. You can't intimidate me. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get you off this island and away from Ethan. He's mine. Olivia returned the stare and crossed her arms. Sarah stood up and threw her purse across her shoulder. For the record, you've seen nothing yet. Mark my words. I will utterly destroy you. Olivia was too stunned to speak as she watched Sarah storm out of the coffee shop. An icy shiver ran down her spine. Nothing good would come from this. She'd only thrown fuel on the flame that was Sarah's rage. Olivia put her head in her hands. What's wrong? Ethan walked over and put a hand on her shoulder in support. I got another cancellation. She sat back up and reread the polite email informing her that her services for next year's Christmas decoration design would no longer be needed. The couple had decided to go in a different direction for their 12-bedroom, 5-living area villa. Any idea where this is coming from? Ethan asked, taking a seat on the ottoman across from the wingback chair she was sitting in. Sarah. She's been spreading rumors about me. About both of us, actually, Olivia said. Don't worry, I'll handle it. She didn't. Ethan jumped to his feet. His mouth was a tight line and his eyebrows knit together to the point they almost touched. Only a deep line in his forehead that usually wasn't there separated them. Don't worry about it. It's nothing I can't handle. She wasn't sure how, yet. But there was no chance she'd let Sarah get away with this. I can't believe she's actually going through with this, Ethan said. What? Olivia looked at the man in front of her. The man she was falling for. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You knew about this? She threatened to do this if I didn't keep playing along. I figured going to that stupid dinner was enough. He ran his fingers through his hair, pacing the room. Trust me, that's not going to happen. She's convinced you two are about to renew your engagement. She showed off her ring when we met the other day. She did what? Ethan turned and stared at her, rage displaced by disbelief. She was trying to get a rise out of me, that's all. It had taken a long walk on the beach, but Olivia had calmed down and was determined not to let this woman ruin her life. Or her livelihood. Though that might prove to be a little more difficult than anticipated. I'm taking care of this right now. Ethan pulled his phone out of his pocket and stepped outside before Olivia could stop him. She watched him pace back and forth in front of the sliding glass doors. The expression on his face made it clear things didn't go well. Ethan stood there, grabbing the railing, staring out across the backyard for a long time after he'd put his phone away. Olivia stepped outside and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, worried he'd catch a cold in the chilly December temperatures. How'd it go? She asked. He shook his head, looking too furious to speak. I appreciate the gesture, but at the end of the day, what Sarah says or does doesn't matter. She stood there next to him, wrapping her arms around her upper body to keep warm. Ethan wrapped the blanket around both of them, pulling her close. She's insane. And manipulative. She told me the only way she's stopping is if I agree to get back together and we set a new date for the wedding. What did you say? Olivia asked. I told her to get lost. He turned to face her, his face mere inches away from hers. I'm sorry I ever agreed to help her. And that I can't protect you from what she's doing. Olivia let out a breath. She raised her hand and cupped his chilled cheek. We'll figure it out. The important part is that we have each other. Ethan lowered his head, touching his forehead to hers. That we do. And there's got to be something we can do to stop these rumors. Well, she can't stay in town forever, right? Olivia asked. Ethan shook his head. She should be gone in a few days. I'll make sure of that. He pulled her closer, wrapping the blanket tightly around them both. I promise I'll make this up to you. And I think I have an idea of where to start. Chapter 11. I appreciate you letting me use your kitchen, Ethan said to Miss Doris. Of course. Always happy to help. Especially if it's for a good cause, like helping young love. Miss Doris took off her apron and hung it on a hook by the pantry. I have a lot to make up for. I hope this does the trick. Ethan looked around the comfortable kitchen that was almost as familiar as his mother's. Let me show you where everything's at before I head out, Miss Doris said, opening cabinet doors and pulling out rolling pins, cookie cutters, and baking sheets. If there's anything else you need, look around or give me a call. I'll have my cell phone on me. Ethan smiled, watching her shove the small device into her purse. He helped the older woman into her winter coat. Don't worry, I'm sure I can handle this. It isn't my first time baking. She smiled at him, her steel gray eyes sparkling with delight as she reached up and patted his cheek. Your mama raised you right. Have fun and don't be afraid to make a mess. Those are the best memories. He closed the door behind her and messaged Olivia, hoping she'd like his idea of how they could spend the day together as much as Miss Doris did. While he waited, he put on a pot of coffee, sprinkling a bit of cinnamon and nutmeg on the grounds. The spices filled the air, along with the holiday tunes he was playing on his phone. What's all this? Olivia asked, walking into the kitchen. Surprise. Ethan grinned, handing her an apron. We are going to bake cookies. We are? Olivia looked as surprised as he'd hoped she would be. We are. Where are those copper cookie cutters we bought the other day? I thought we could try them as intended before you turn them into ornaments, Ethan said, leaning against the counter, holding up a rolling pin. Too late, Olivia laughed and there was genuine joy written all over her face. The tension from the past few days was gone, and Ethan knew he'd made the right decision for their date. Good thing Miss Doris has these, then. He held up a handful of the silver metal pieces shaped like stars, hearts, Christmas trees, and, of course, gingerbread people. Olivia took the apron and tied it behind her back. What's the plan, and can I have some of this delicious coffee? Make sugar cookie dough, chill it in the fridge while we have coffee, decorate, bake. Ethan waved his hands across the implements on the counter. There better be sprinkles, Olivia said, challenge blazing in her eyes. Of course there are. Several kinds. He held up the reusable shopping bag he'd brought. You came prepared. Impressive. Olivia glanced at the sugar, butter, eggs, and flour in the bag before pulling the sprinkle containers out. Can you hold off on the coffee while we make the dough? Ethan asked. Olivia shook her head, her auburn hair moving back and forth. Coffee first. But really? One type of cookie? We can do better than that. She pulled 2 coffee cups down before digging around and pulling out chocolate chips, brown sugar, molasses, and a variety of different spices. I like the way you think. He poured them each a cup of coffee and handed her one. Let's get this baking session started. Olivia clinked her cup to his and took a cautious sip. We'll need something a little more upbeat than White Christmas. Ethan handed her his phone. Her fingers flew across the screen and the music changed from old-fashioned holiday tunes to something more modern with a faster beat that sped up his heart better than the caffeine. Do you want to cream the butter and sugar or sift the flour? He asked. I'll take the flour. Olivia got to work, as did he. No mixer? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. Too loud. I'm enjoying the music. Besides, it's not that hard to cream butter and sugar by hand. Ethan showed off his skills, biting back a laugh when he noticed her dusting more flour on the counter than in the bowl. Oops. I guess the countertop is ready for rolling out the dough. Olivia moved the sieve and kept going, adding a bit of baking powder and salt to the mix. Bit early for that. The dough needs to chill for at least 30 minutes before we roll it out, Ethan said. Hey, just getting ahead of the game. You mind your own business. Olivia put her bowl down, swaying to the beat of the music filling the room. It was nice to see her like this. Relaxed, happy, with a big smile on her face and a sparkle in the eyes he couldn't stop thinking about. Ready for the eggs? He asked and then stepped back, letting her crack them into the bowl. We make a good team, Olivia said, watching the sugar cookie dough come together. We do. Ethan wrapped the dough in a piece of cling wrap. What do you want to do while we wait for this to chill? We could figure out what else we can bake. I wouldn't mind making some gingerbread people, Olivia said. Let's do it. What else? Ethan glanced through the pantry, pulling out spices. Thumbprint cookies? And how about something with peanut butter? Olivia grinned. You've got it. We're going all out. He dug through Miss Doris's fridge and found a jar of raspberry jam. Go big or go home. Olivia twirled through the kitchen, refilling their coffee cups before sorting through the cookie cutters. We might owe Miss Doris some groceries by the time we're done. Ethan strode across the kitchen and pulled her close. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. He kissed her on the nose before reaching in his back pocket and pulling a small piece of fake mistletoe out. He dangled it over their heads, watching Olivia's face for a reaction. She laughed before cupping his cheeks and pulling him in for a kiss that was sweeter than any Christmas cookie. That was a lot of fun, Olivia said, munching on a gingerbread cookie. You're going to get a bellyache if you keep eating those, Ethan said, pulling out into the street. He'd watched her snack on everything they'd been baking all afternoon long. Olivia shoved the rest of the cookie into her mouth. Don't worry, I won't. Besides, did you know that gingerbread cookies were considered a powerful folk remedy? They'd make them for kids when they had an upset belly. Really? Ethan turned and glanced at her quickly before turning onto the main road that ran the length of the entire island. Really? I watched a history documentary about it the other night. Something about the honey and all that ginger. So the cookie is medicinal? He teased. Exactly. Oh look, I see lights up ahead. Olivia leaned forward, pointing at the colorful twinkling display in front of them. This entire neighborhood is nice. Ethan signaled and turned. People compete with each other. the displays get bigger each year. No joke. They don't play around here, do they? Olivia was glued to her window, taking in the sight. What this needs is a proper soundtrack. Ethan fiddled with the radio dial until he found a station that played nothing but Christmas tunes. Olivia's shoulders moved in time with the music. She picked up her thermal cup, and he did the same. They sipped hot chocolate and took in the sight as he slowly made a loop through this part of town. Icicle lights hung from gutters, trees were wrapped in strings of lights, and reindeer grazed on the lawns, next to large snowmen and every holiday blow-up imaginable. Some of the homeowners had outlined their entire roofline in lights. Others had placed Santa in his sleigh on the roof. It was a sight to behold. I don't want to think about what their power bill looks like come January, Olivia said. Probably not as bad as it used to be. Most of these look like LED lights. He remembered a time when they'd used regular bulbs to decorate the farm and you could practically see the power meter roll with each kilowatt-hour spent. I'm glad. She smiled and raised her cup, taking another sip of hot chocolate. Turn left here. Why? Ethan looked down the dark side street. There's something I want to show you. Olivia directed him down the road and had him pull into the drive of a small bungalow with a for sale sign in the front yard. It's a nice place. Ethan took in the corner lot, the single-car garage, and the small brick building. It looked like it was built in the late 60s or early 70s. I was thinking about putting in an offer on the place. Make it my home here. Her voice became wistful, almost sad. That sounds like you're changing your mind. Something wrong with it? If there was, he hoped he could help her fix it. No, it's perfect. And it was in the budget, except now. Now Sarah is doing everything she can to destroy your business, he said. Because of me. Not because of you. Because of who she is. Olivia turned and looked at him. Her blue eyes no longer sparkling with joy. The color was deeper and there was a sadness in them he wished he could wipe away. She fooled us both. Ethan nodded. She did. And we're not going to let her get away with it. Olivia nodded slowly. I'm not giving up without a fight. Even if it means letting go of the dream of owning this place. There will be other perfect little homes for sale when the time is right. Don't give up yet, Ethan said. We'll see what happens. Ready to head back? Olivia asked. I'm out of hot chocolate. Sure. Ethan backed out of the driveway and made his way to the main road. It's nothing more than a minor setback. As soon as Sarah is gone, things will go back to normal. I'm not so sure, Olivia said. She might do enough damage that I can't recover. If the rumors she started keep spreading. We'll fight it, Ethan said. You do great work. Word will get around and your calendar will be filled in no time. We'll see. Olivia looked out the passenger window. If I can't turn this around, my best option might be to move. Fresh start and all that. Hey, I hope it doesn't come to that, Ethan said as he pulled up in front of Miss Doris's house. Me too. Olivia unbuckled her seatbelt. I like it here. And I enjoy being with you. Ethan turned and leaned in. I like you too, he said, before pulling her in for a long kiss. See you tomorrow? Olivia asked. You bet. Ethan watched her walk into the house, thinking about everything she'd shared during their drive across the island. He wasn't ready for her to pack up and leave. He would do whatever it took to make sure she could stay. Feeling determined, Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed. Sarah, it's Ethan. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Mary's diner tomorrow for lunch? Chapter 12. Another cancellation? Miss Doris asked, handing Olivia a cup of tea and a plate of the sugar cookies she and Ethan made yesterday. Olivia nodded. Only a meeting with a prospective client this time. I guess that means my afternoon cleared up. Do you want help with the baking? No, thank you, hon, I have it covered. Just a dozen pies and a few batches of muffins for the last bake sale of the year. I can do that in my sleep. You go out and have some fun. Take your mind off what's been going on, Miss Doris said, smiling at her encouragingly. Maybe do a little Christmas shopping. Olivia nodded, not quite in the mood, but what else could she do? And don't worry. We'll straighten this whole business thing out in no time. People are loving what you did at the bookstore and the flower shop. Word will get around and your phone will start ringing night and day, Miss Doris said. Right on cue, her phone buzzed. Olivia waved at Miss Doris, shrugged into her winter coat, and took the call outside. Unfortunately, it was another cancellation. This time for a summer design she'd counted on to get her through June. She was in the roasted bean ordering a wintry pick-me-up when her realtor called. Ready to make an offer on the house? Can I take a couple of days to think about it? Olivia asked. I would advise against it. Interest in the place is picking up. There isn't too much on the market in that price range. You'll have my answer in the morning, Olivia said. When her sugary, spicy drink was ready, she walked out, wandering the streets of the island, thinking about what she should do. The house was cute and the perfect fit. It had huge potential. But without a steady clientele, she wouldn't be able to afford it. Or rent something comparable in town. Olivia sighed. Not even the gingerbread latte made her feel better. She liked it here on Palmar Island, but the place wasn't home. Not yet. She didn't have deep roots, and aside from the friends she'd made, there was little that kept her here. Except Ethan. Olivia blinked when she thought she saw him cross the street ahead of her, about to turn a corner. Ethan, she called, but the man in his dark winter jacket and jeans didn't turn. Olivia wondered if she was seeing things until she spotted his truck parked off to the side. Deep in thought, she strode down the sidewalk and turned the corner, surprised to see Mary's diner ahead. What was even more surprising was seeing Ethan walk up to Sarah, who had a huge smile on her face. When they hugged, before walking arm in arm into the casual restaurant, Olivia turned and made her way back to her car. It must have been another meal with the Braxtons, Olivia muttered under her breath while she dug around her pocket for the car keys. Except there had been no sign of Mr. and Mrs. Braxton. Olivia started her car and put it into drive, only pausing when her phone rang. Sighing, she looked at the screen, mentally preparing herself for another client calling to cancel a meeting or a job already on the books. To her surprise, it wasn't a local number. It was a familiar one, though. Hello Mom, Olivia said, putting the car back in park. Livy, I'm so glad I caught you. Fred and I were talking, and we'd really like to have you home for the holidays. I know it's been a while and it's last minute, but I'd love to see you. Olivia swallowed, surprised how much hearing her mother's voice affected her. I have a ticket with your name on it, and you're welcome to stay with us through the first of the year. What do you say? Her mother asked. You know what? I'd love to see you too, Olivia said quickly before she could change her mind. When do I leave? Maybe a break from the island and everything that had happened here these past few weeks was exactly what she needed. Flying home for the holidays? The man next to her asked. He looked like he was in his early 60s, sharply dressed in a fitted wool suit and a nice pair of shoes. If the watch on his wrist was real, it was worth more than Olivia's car. I am. How about you? She asked. Since they were stuck for the next couple of hours, she might as well get to know her seatmate. Same here. Let's hope the snow holds off long enough for us to make it back. He smiled, buckling his seatbelt. What brings you to Myrtle Beach? I live on Palmar Island. It's a small community a little south of here, Olivia said. He looked surprised. I know it. What is a beautiful young woman like yourself doing there, if I may ask? I'm an interior designer specializing in holiday decorations, Olivia said. And you wrapped up your last job before heading out to see family, he said confidently. Are you any good? Olivia laughed. I'd like to think so. Despite the demoralizing calls, she didn't doubt her ability to get the job done. She was good at what she did and would blow any other designer in the area out of the water if these people would give her a chance. "Do you have some pictures of your work?" the man asked, pointing to the phone in her hand. "I think I do. I'm still establishing my business in the area, but I've done a couple of smaller jobs leading up to Christmas." Olivia scrolled through her image gallery, grateful she went back and took pictures of what she'd done at the book nook and the flower shop. The man pulled a pair of glasses from inside his suit pocket and leaned in for a closer look. "Not bad. You have an eye for this. Excellent use of the space too. I could use someone like you." "Excuse me?" Olivia shut off her phone. "That was rude of me. I'm Hal Becker. I own a chain of furniture stores all along the East Coast." He handed her a business card. It was a higher quality than what she'd ordered online. This was linen stock with a clean, professional logo. Something done by a big marketing firm or advertising agency, like the place Zoe used to work for in New York City. He'd probably spent a small fortune on them. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Becker. I'm Olivia Foster." She held out her hand, and he shook it. "Call me Hal. I'm serious. I need someone to do a better job at my stores. I spent the past 3 weeks traveling up and down the eastern seaboard, taking a look, and what we're doing isn't cutting it anymore. The competition is leaving me in the dust. I could use someone with your eye for design." The offer was tempting, even without knowing much about Hal's business or the exact position. But that was the difficulty of her current situation speaking. Olivia handed Hal one of her own cards. "Tell you what, put an offer in writing and I promise I'll consider it." She didn't expect to hear from the man. She certainly didn't expect to have a generous offer in her email inbox by the time she made it to her mother's house. On paper, the job looked good. Great even. It was exactly what she'd imagined she'd be doing back in school. And it would give her a chance to spend more time in Boston. "It's nice to have you back here," her mother said over dinner 2 days later. "It's been a long time since I had everyone I love at the same table." Olivia took her hand and squeezed it. "It's nice to be back." She was surprised how much she meant it. In the past, she'd been ready to leave after spending 24 hours with her mother and her boyfriend of the month. Her new husband was different. Fred was a nice guy, and his daughter and her little family were adorable. Even her mother was easier to get along with. It probably had something to do with the fact that she seemed truly happy and in love for the first time in as long as Olivia could remember. "Would you be living here in Boston if you took the job?" Fred asked, reading the contract carefully. She'd asked the retired lawyer to look it over for anything she was missing. There had to be a catch. A 6-figure starting salary and a generous design budget seemed too good to be true. Especially this out of the blue. "I think so. I'd be traveling a lot. A condo would probably make the most sense," Olivia said. Getting a mortgage shouldn't be a problem if she was employed instead of being in business for herself. "You're welcome to stay with us until you get settled and find something you like," her mother said. "There's plenty of room," Fred added. "And this looks like a solid offer. If you were my daughter, I'd tell you to take it." He slid the paperwork back to her. It was better than solid. And very tempting, considering the cancellations hadn't stopped. And it wasn't like the good people of Palmar Island were lining up to speak to her about their interior design needs, despite everything Miss Doris was doing on her end. Which left only one other part of the equation, Ethan. It was time to make the call. "How's your trip? Enjoying the time with your family?" Ethan asked, picking up on the second ring. "It's nice. Everyone's getting along." Olivia sat in the middle of the king-sized bed that took up a good chunk of the guest room she was occupying. "Any more snow?" he asked in the same easygoing tone he'd used in the handful of phone conversations they'd had since she left 3 days ago. "Another foot or so." She'd sent him pictures when it had started coming down in earnest a few hours after she'd made it here. "I remember one year we had a couple of inches. It shut down the entire island for days." Ethan chuckled. Let's hope it doesn't get worse before you leave. I'd hate for you to get stuck up there in a pile of snow. Speaking of which, Olivia grabbed a pillow and put it behind her back. There's something you should know. I have an offer for a job up here in Boston. A good one. Ethan was quiet. Only his even breathing was audible on the other end of the line. Are you thinking about taking it? I'm considering it. It's a good offer, and it's not like business is booming down there, Olivia said, hoping to get some sort of reaction out of the man. He hadn't questioned her decision to fly home or mentioned Sarah since Olivia left. She wasn't sure if his ex was still on the island or long gone. Right. If it's a great offer, it's probably worth considering, Ethan said. Listen, I have to run. Can we talk about this later? Sure. The line went dead and Olivia sat on the large bed, wondering if it was time to give up on the charming island and the man who had captured her heart. Chapter 13. Any news from Olivia? His mother asked when Ethan came down for coffee the next morning. We talked yesterday. She's thinking of taking a job up in Boston. Ethan fell into the chair, gratefully accepting the cup his mother handed him. Thanks. Really? I thought she was settling in here. She topped off her own coffee and took the seat across from him. She was. Until all this stuff with Sarah happened. He leaned back and ran his fingers through his hair. When had his life gone from hopeful to such a complete mess? Right. There's got to be something we can do. I tried. I had lunch with Sarah, trying to smooth stuff over, but short of me getting engaged to her again, he shook his head. The woman was crazy for even considering the idea. And he was done. Done feeling like he owed her something because he'd made a promise to her months ago. A promise she'd chosen to break and run off. Ethan, listen to me. His mom reached over and grabbed his hand. Don't even think about it. I'm not. Trust me. Sarah will leave town if she's not already gone. But she's determined to make it impossible for Olivia to get her business off the ground down here, and it looks like she's succeeded. Olivia has given up? His mom asked. That's what it sounds like. She got a great offer out of the blue, and it sounds like she's enjoying being close to her family. It stung, but what could he do? Does she know how you feel about her? His mother's tone was gentle, her hand still squeezing his. She does. Not that it matters. Women left, and he was the one stuck here on the island nursing a bruised heart. She's not Sarah. You know that, right? What does that have to do with anything? He wasn't following her train of thought. Olivia is a good person, and from where I'm standing, she cares for you deeply. She smiled at him encouragingly. Ethan wished with every fiber of his being that this was true. Except it wasn't. She had left and found a better opportunity, a different life. How much could she really care if that's all it took to leave him in the dust? Why don't you head out for a bit? His mother rose and put her cup in the sink. Clear your head. Your cousin and Miss Doris are cleaning up from the bake sale in the town square yesterday. I'm sure they could use an extra pair of hands. I don't think. I promised you'd use your truck to get the tables and chairs back to the church. You don't mind, do you? She asked. Ethan sighed. Let me go get everyone fed and watered, and I'll head over there. Thanks, honey. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. With Daniel's help, chores didn't take long, and Ethan was on his way to the town square before the sun was able to melt the last traces of frost. He stepped out of the truck and blew into his hands to warm them up. What can I do to help? A small group of women, including Miss Doris and Zoe, were busy taking down the tent that had held the annual bake sale in support of one of the local churches. It was an annual affair and always a big hit. Can you grab the other side of the tent and help me take it down? Zoe asked. Together, they made quick work of it. What's next? He looked around the folded tables and chairs. Load all of this into your truck and take it to the church. The Reverend should be waiting. Zoe grabbed a stack of chairs before he could stop her. Let's start with the tables, then add the chairs on top. He took charge and, thanks to years of playing Tetris, he managed to stack everything into the small bed of his truck. I'll come along and help you unload, Zoe offered. If you don't mind giving me a ride to Miss Doris's after. My car is parked there. No problem at all, he assured her. You two stop in for some coffee cake when you're done. I'm working on a new recipe, Miss Doris said. We will. Zoe hopped in the passenger side of the truck before Ethan got a chance to protest. Let's make this quick, Ethan said when he cranked up the truck and pulled out of the parking spot. I have work to do on the farm. Aren't you in a bad mood today? Zoe shook her head. It wouldn't have anything to do with Olivia and that job offer in Boston. How do you know about that? He asked. We're friends. We talk. Zoe shrugged. Right. Ethan shook his head. I don't want to talk about it. Olivia had made her choice and there was nothing he could do about it. Stubborn as always. Zoe's voice was full of disapproval and Ethan stepped on it, making it to the church in record time. He thought he'd dodged a bullet when Zoe dropped the topic while they stacked the tables and chairs and helped the Reverend put away the small tent. How is Olivia? Miss Doris asked when they stepped into her warm and inviting kitchen. Ethan couldn't help thinking about the time he'd spent baking and singing with Olivia, kissing her. Having a good time with her family in Boston, from what I hear, Zoe said when he didn't answer. Good for her. Will she be back in time for Christmas or stay there through the first of the year? Miss Doris handed them each a piece of coffee cake and a cup of joe to go with it. This coffee cake is excellent. What's the flavor I'm tasting in addition to cinnamon? Ethan asked. It's ginger, nutmeg and a hint of cardamom, but don't tell anyone, Miss Doris said before turning to Zoe. What happened? Olivia is considering taking a job up north and my cousin, here, is planning on letting her go without a fight. Zoe sat back and crossed her arms. What do you expect me to do? It's her life. Her choice, Ethan said. I expect you to fly to Boston and show up on her doorstep with the biggest bouquet of flowers you can get your hands on. I expect you to talk to everyone you know on the island and dispel those nasty rumors Sarah has been spreading. I expect you to do something. Anything. Unless you're just not into her. That's a little harsh, but Zoe has a point. Are you ready to give up on what you and Olivia have? Miss Doris asked, her steel blue eyes scanning his face. James, I didn't know you were coming in this morning, Ethan said, surprised to see his oldest brother at the breakfast table on Christmas Eve morning. I couldn't sleep and figured I might as well get ahead of the traffic. James suppressed a yawn and took a big gulp of coffee. Might need a nap before church tonight, though. You and me both. I stayed up way too late watching movies with Zoe and Mason last night. Daniel walked in and yawned, heading straight for the coffee maker. That explains why you missed morning chores, Ethan said. I'm on vacation here. Cut me some slack, Daniel said. What's going on with you in Boston, by the way? I'm surprised to see you here. Zoe made it sound like you should definitely head up there. On Christmas Eve? James asked with a raised eyebrow. Honestly, I don't know what to do. Ethan sat down and looked at his brothers. Want to catch me up on what's going on here, little brother? James asked. I met this woman. Everything was going well and then Sarah showed up. Ethan quickly conveyed everything that had happened in the past month, including Olivia's surprise trip back home to Boston. Sounds to me like your best option is to head out there and bring her back with you, James said. Caveman style? We can do better than that. I say surprise her Christmas morning with some flowers and a gift. What does she like? Daniel asked. Boston is what? A 14-hour drive from here? James looked at him. I doubt your truck will make it, but you're welcome to use my car. Heck, we could make it a Winter Brothers road trip, James said. All of us leaving on Christmas? Yeah, Mom's going to love that, Daniel said. Don't worry. We can get you up there. I have some miles. Only one problem, Ethan said, watching his youngest brother search for flights on his phone. What's that? James asked. I have no idea where she's staying, he said, sounding defeated, even to his own ears. Even if I got to Boston, what am I going to do? Wander around hoping to run into her? You could call the woman and ask her for her address, James said. That would take the surprise out of it. We're trying to make a statement here. Daniel looked into the void, his eyebrows knit together. Who do you know that knows her family? Ethan shrugged. Zoe is friends with her, but I doubt she knows. Besides, I may have already told her to stay up there and take the job if that's what she really wants. It's out of my hands. That's a bunch of, Daniel turned when their mother walked into the kitchen. Bologna, and you know it. If nothing else, talk to her. Tell her how you feel. Put it all on the line. He's right, you know. Their mother put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. James nodded his head. And if he was honest with himself, Ethan knew they were right. Only the fear of rejection was holding him back. All right, I'll call. Still nothing from Olivia? James asked when Ethan walked downstairs to join his family. He shook his head, adjusting his tie and shrugging into his suit jacket. He'd left her a lengthy voicemail pouring out his heart, but so far there had been nothing. She's probably busy with family stuff. I'm sure you'll hear something by morning. Daniel put an arm around his shoulder. Is Mark coming? Ethan asked. He ran into traffic. He'll meet us at church, his father said. Nice. That means we can take one car. James pulled on his own jacket and grabbed his keys. I'll drive. Ethan appreciated his brother's suggestion when they made it to the parking lot, snagging one of the last spots for the popular service. It was the usual candlelight service and always a favorite, but this year, Ethan struggled to pay attention. His mind kept wandering to a certain blue-eyed, auburn-haired beauty, remembering the night they helped birth a calf together. Remembering the winter wonderland she'd created for the children and the day of holiday fun, none of them would forget anytime soon. And as the lengthy service progressed, he found himself wondering what she was doing at this very moment. He pictured her in one of the large, old Boston churches, attending a similar service with her family. Or maybe she was sitting by the tree, drinking a cup of hot chocolate, thinking about him. The thought put a smile on his face. It was hard to lose hope in a place like this that was filled with it. Ethan pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket to check for a message from the woman he loved, earning him a stern glance from his mother. Some things never changed. Holding the device down in his lap, he glanced at the dimly lit screen, his heart dropping. Nothing. Not even a text wishing him a Merry Christmas. Ethan swallowed his disappointment, forcing his attention on the service. He had much to be grateful for. A loving family, a warm home waiting for him, and a family legacy to carry on. It would be enough. For now. Still nothing? Daniel asked when they walked out of the stone building. Ethan shook his head. Guess it wasn't meant to be, he said. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Mark said, ticking his head to the side. Ethan turned and saw Olivia standing there, away from the crowd, wrapped in a thick winter coat. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw him, and she smiled at him more brightly than the collective flames during the candlelight service. Without a word, he strode over to her, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her until they were both breathless. Merry Christmas, he whispered into her hair. She was here, in his arms. For now, it was all that mattered and the only Christmas present he needed. Chapter 14. Merry Christmas. Come on in. There's coffee brewing and the cinnamon rolls are almost done, Miss Doris said. Olivia couldn't help smiling when she watched Ethan Winter walk into the warm and cozy kitchen where they'd baked cookies together. Today the place was just as inviting, but smelled of cinnamon and spice and everything nice. Including good, strong coffee. "Merry Christmas," he said in his rich voice. Again. "Merry Christmas." Olivia rose and walked into his open arms. Miss Doris coughed. "I'm going to get ready. If you don't mind, frost those cinnamon rolls for me and help yourself to some." "Will do," Olivia called across Ethan's shoulder, a huge smile spreading across her face. "I'm glad you're back." Ethan pulled her tighter, holding her like he never wanted to let her go. Which was perfectly fine with her. "I'm happy to be back, too." Olivia put her head on his shoulder. "Though I don't recommend flying on Christmas Eve. It was a bit of a mess. But well worth it, so we can spend today together." Ethan kissed the top of her head and stepped back. "And deal with these cinnamon rolls." "Right. Wouldn't want to get on Miss Doris's bad side." Olivia took the bowl of softened cream cheese frosting. She pulled 2 butter knives out of the utensil drawer and handed one to Ethan. "Let's get to work. It's easier to spread while they're still warm." "Yes, ma'am." Ethan smeared a fair amount on the first cinnamon roll. "Can I ask a question?" "Of course," Olivia said, turning to look at him. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" Ethan asked. "Aside from eating too many sweet treats, starting with at least one of these cinnamon rolls?" Olivia asked with a grin. "Yes." He didn't crack a smile. Olivia reached up and cupped his cheek. "I plan on staying here on Palmar Island with you." "What about your business?" he asked, his eyes carefully scanning her face. "I'm going to do everything I can to make this work," Olivia said. "I can't make Sarah disappear, but I'm not giving up without a fight." "Good. I'm not either. We'll make this work." Ethan's expression was fierce. Too fierce. And much too worried. This was Christmas. They were together. On impulse, Olivia took the knife and touched it to his cheek, leaving a smear of frosting. Ethan's eyes widened, then his lips twitched. "Oh, that's how it's going to be?" He used his finger to remove the sticky, sweet topping before touching it to her nose. "You didn't," Olivia grinned, reaching for the entire bowl of frosting, but he was faster. Taking it out of her hand, he leaned in and kissed the frosting from her nose. "Tasty." He feathered kisses down her cheek to the corner of the mouth. "Even sweeter." Olivia's breath hitched in anticipation of what his mouth would do next. "I am so sorry to interrupt," Miss Doris said. Olivia jerked backward, and Ethan took a step back, placing the bowl of cream cheese frosting on the counter. "I'll only be a minute. I just need my purse, the French toast casserole in the oven, and Ethan, would you mind handing me that basket of cookies over there?" Miss Doris pointed to a large wicker one filled to the brim with bags of homemade cookies. Each one was tied with a red or green ribbon, a bit of greenery, and red berries tucked in as decoration. "Of course. Making your Christmas morning rounds?" Ethan asked. Olivia looked from him to her. "Every Christmas morning since my husband passed, I make it a point to visit people on the island who don't have family to spend the holidays with. I give them some goodies, we have a little chat and a cup of coffee." Miss Doris shrugged like it was no big deal. "This is for my friend Rebecca. It's her first Christmas without her husband. I thought she could use a little extra cheering up." "And the cinnamon rolls?" Olivia asked, looking at the pan that held close to a dozen of the sugary pastries. "Those are for you and Ethan. I had a feeling you would come back." Miss Doris dug around in her purse for something. "Do you need help getting all this to the car?" Ethan asked. Miss Doris shook her head and took the basket from him, hanging it from her arm before picking up the casserole dish. "No need. I'm not that old and frail. Yet." "Why don't you stop by the farm after you're done distributing those?" Ethan said. "We'd love to have you for Christmas Day lunch." Miss Doris stopped and paused for a moment. "I'll stop by, but I can't stay long. I'm heading to my great-niece's place for an early Christmas dinner. Her name is Sarah too." "Let's hope she's a nicer person," Olivia muttered under her breath as Miss Doris walked out the kitchen door. "What was that?" Ethan said, turning to look at her. Nothing. Forget I said anything. Sarah wasn't worth worrying over. Not today, when she had so much to be happy about. Speaking of Sarah, I almost forgot. Miss Doris stepped back inside and put down the casserole dish. She and I had a little chat yesterday. About what? Olivia asked, fairly certain they were no longer talking about Miss Doris's great-niece. Oh, I just mentioned that I would get in touch with Mrs. Braxton and tell the woman exactly what her husband's new protégé has been up to if she didn't stop what she was doing immediately. I may also have suggested that it would be best for everyone involved if Sarah left town as quickly as possible. What did she say? Ethan asked, sounding as concerned as Olivia felt. Not much. But she gave me this to give to you. Miss Doris pulled a small item from her purse and handed it to Ethan. He held it out in the palm of his hand. The engagement ring. She actually gave it back. Olivia looked up from the ring and into his eyes. She saw relief there. It quickly morphed into joy, his lips spreading into a huge smile. It's only proper, Miss Doris said with a smile of her own. Her steel-gray eyes sparkled. I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but when the time comes, you are going to need a different ring, young man. Olivia coughed, to keep from bursting out laughing. Don't worry, this ring is going back to the jeweler's first chance I get. Besides, when the day comes, I have something very special in mind. Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers. Let's not put the cart before the horse. Olivia felt warmth rising from her neck and into her cheeks. It was much too early to talk about rings. They barely knew each other, and she had a business to rebuild. Right you are. I'm off. Lock up behind you, and I'll see you at the farm in a few hours, Miss Doris said. We should probably eat some of these, Ethan said, pointing to the cinnamon rolls. His stomach growled, making Olivia laugh. Good idea. I could use some more coffee too. They spent a pleasant half an hour enjoying the baked goods, washing it down with strong coffee. Olivia talked about Boston, the few sights she'd seen, and the craziness of flying on December 24th. I should probably head back up there for a couple of days after the first of the year, she said. Spend a little more time with my folks. Ethan nodded. That's a good idea. You could join me, if you'd like. Olivia held her breath. See all that history for yourself. Meet my mom and her new husband. Are you sure? Ethan looked at her, the last bite of cinnamon roll sitting uneaten on his plate. Olivia nodded. I'm sure. I'll have to check with my dad. See if Daniel can stick around for a little longer to help on the farm, Ethan said, his tone contemplative. My father isn't getting any younger, and it's a fair amount of work in the winter. Of course. Or we can postpone until the spring, Olivia said, pausing when Ethan raised an eyebrow. The summer? Ethan laughed. I guess there's never a good time to leave the farm. We'll figure something out. I'd love to meet your family. And I'm sure they'd love to meet you as well, Olivia said, making a mental note to call her mom. We'll make it work. First, though, we should go see my folks. Why don't you go get ready, and I'll clean up here, Ethan said. Olivia was only too happy to take him up on his offer and walked back to her room to change. When she came back 15 minutes later, the kitchen was clean and Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. Her own rang, and she picked it up. Olivia Foster, how can I help you? Olivia? This is Evelyn Sutton. We spoke the other day, the woman on the other end of the line said. I'm surprised you answered your phone. It's Christmas morning. I expected to reach voicemail. Olivia remembered. Mrs. Sutton was one of the prospective clients who had cancelled their meeting. I'm always happy to be there for clients if I can, she said. I'm glad to hear it. And I hope you will consider meeting with me after the first of the year. I have a few events this year I could use your help with, the woman said. Can we put something on the calendar for the second week of February? Of course. Olivia looked around and saw a calendar for the coming year hanging on the kitchen wall, by the door. Grateful for Miss Doris's foresight, she glanced through the dates. How does the 11th sound? Perfect. Let's say lunch at Chez Paul's. My treat, Mrs. Sutton said. It's the least I can do after brushing you off earlier. Olivia shook her head in disbelief after wrapping up her call. I got a job. Several actually, from the sound of it. Good. Ethan grinned and pulled her into his arms. Olivia felt her phone buzzing and glanced at the screen. It's a text message from a client, wanting to rebook a job they cancelled for a New Year's party. I have a feeling this is only the beginning, Ethan said. Whatever Miss Doris has been doing, it's working. And with Sarah out of the picture for good. Let's hope you're right. Olivia looked around for a piece of wood to knock on. Before I forget, I have something for you, Ethan said. He reached into the pocket of the winter jacket that hung across the back of his chair and handed her a small gift. It was wrapped in brown paper, a bit of twine wrapped around it and tied with a simple bow. I have something for you too. Give me 2 seconds. Olivia rushed to her room and returned with the small box she'd carefully prepared early that morning. You first, Ethan said, holding the gift like it was something precious. It isn't much, Olivia said, feeling a little self-conscious about the last-minute gift. Neither is yours. But like my grandmother always said, it's the thought that counts. Ethan smiled at her encouragingly. Right. Olivia gently pried the tape off and peeled back the paper to reveal an adorable calf Christmas ornament. It looks just like Humphrey. If he wore a Christmas hat. I'm pretty sure that bow and bell are a no-go too, Ethan grinned. But yes, it reminded me of him. That's why I got it. I love it. Olivia wished she had a tree to hang it on. For now, the pine branch she'd hung up over the dresser in Miss Doris's guest room would have to do. And I can't wait to see Betsy and Humphrey again. I'll take you out to the barn after lunch, Ethan promised. It's a date, Olivia said. Your turn. Ethan opened the box and pushed aside the shredded tissue paper. Nestled inside was one of the copper ornaments they'd bought together. He lifted it up and examined it carefully. A Christmas tree. Olivia nodded. To remind you of the tree in the barn we decorated together. And I'm assuming this is mistletoe? Ethan's lips twitched. He already knew what it was. It is. In that case, Ethan raised his hand above their heads, dangling the ornament above them. Olivia laughed and leaned in, kissing the man who tasted like cinnamon, sugar, and happily ever after. Epilogue. Palmar Island. 1 year later. Does it feel strange? Ethan asked, taking Olivia's hand as they walked across the Christmas market where they met exactly 1 year ago. Does what feel strange? Olivia looked across the crowd of familiar faces, taking in the festive atmosphere, the joyful music, and the tantalizing sense of freshly baked cookies, candied almonds, and the rich aroma of fresh coffee and hot cocoa. The whole place looked, sounded, and smelled like Christmas. And like home. Being here and not having a stand at the market, Ethan said. Olivia thought about it for a moment, thinking back on the weekends she'd spent here last year, selling curated ornaments and holiday decorations, making connections, and finding her first few interior design clients. It doesn't. I enjoyed my time as a vendor, but this is nicer. She snuggled closer, putting her arm around Ethan, as they continued to make their way across the town square toward the large Christmas tree in the center. Snowflakes danced in the air and lights twinkled no matter where you looked. A small group of children rushed past them, heading for the fake ice rink. It was plastic, and the skates had felt glued to the bottom, but it did the trick in above-freezing temperatures. The kids had a blast. Remind me to take you to a real ice skating rink next time we're in Boston, Olivia said. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not great on ice, before you add thin blades. It's not going to end well. Ethan looked at her doubtfully. Trust me, it'll be fun. Olivia had no doubt in her mind. So far, Ethan had risen to every challenge she'd thrown his way, and there had been plenty. Especially when it came to her business. The man had raised 12-foot trees and hung lights on the rooflines of mansions larger than the apartment building she'd lived in as a child. All with a smile on his face. And she'd gotten surprisingly good at farm chores. Ethan and his brothers still teased her about being a big city girl who barely knew where eggs came from, but she was learning and enjoying every step of the way. "The last thing I expected when I came to the market last year was to run into you," Ethan said. "And I didn't expect to fall in love. Especially not with my friend's ex-fiancé." Olivia squeezed his hand. "Ex-friend's ex-fiancé." Ethan shook his head. "I'm glad she's moved on, and I hope she finds happiness. That's all up to her now." Olivia was done worrying about Sarah. She'd seen the woman's engagement post on social media and wished her well. Other than that, she didn't plan to waste another thought on her. Not when there was so much going on in her own life. "In a way, I'm grateful she showed up. It pushed me to get over myself and forced me to face my past," Ethan said. She looked up at the man who had become such an important part of her life over the past year. "You're right. It made us stronger. For that, I'm grateful. And I'm grateful to spend a beautiful winter day with you." Ethan steered her toward a stand of handmade ornaments. "I think we should pick something. For our future tree." Olivia smiled, liking the idea of their tree but also trying not to read anything into his words. After their rocky start last December, they'd decided to take it slow. They'd dated, gotten to know each other, and supported their respective endeavors here on the island. And along the way, their love for each other had blossomed and grown. "How about this?" She held up a metal star. It looked aged, almost rusted, and was adorned with pine needles and frosted berries. None of them were real, but beautiful nonetheless. "I like it," Ethan said. "Almost as much as I like you." He kissed her on the nose before making their purchase. "What's next?" Olivia asked when they stepped away from the stand. "Tree or hot chocolate?" "Let's go look at the tree." Ethan took her hand again and pulled her closer to the Douglas fir that rose high above the rest of the market. It was decorated with strings of lights, bright ornaments in a variety of different metallic colors. Deep red bows completed the look. It was a little traditional for her taste, but it worked. A group of residents dressed in formal wear and thick wool coats gathered around the base of the tree. "What's going on?" Olivia asked. "Did you miss this last year?" Ethan asked. "You're in for a treat." Before Olivia could ask a follow-up question, the men and women raised their voices in a medley of Christmas songs. All of it was sung a cappella and was beautiful. The sound of their voices harmonizing perfectly sent chills down her spine and surrounded her in a warm embrace at the same time. Ethan stood behind her and wrapped his arms around her. Olivia leaned against his firm body and let the sounds of the season wash through her. It filled her heart with gratitude and love. Love for this island, the people she called her friends and neighbors. Love for the Winter family who'd taken her in as one of their own. And love for Ethan. Her rock, her anchor. "Olivia?" He gently turned her around to face him as the concert came to a close. "Yes?" She looked deep into his eyes, feeling like she'd known this man forever. He was her soulmate, her everything. The man she was going to love for the rest of her life. Ethan took her hand and got down on one knee. "Olivia, this is where our love story began, and here is where I want it to continue. Will you make me the happiest man in the world and marry me?" Tears of joy welled in Olivia's heart. She nodded, too moved and surprised to speak. Ethan reached into his pocket, and under the lights of the Christmas tree, he slipped a sparkling engagement ring on her finger. "Yes, I'll marry you," Olivia said, raising her hand for a closer look. The ring looked old, like an antique. "It was my grandmother's," Ethan said, wrapping his fingers around her hand again. "Do you like it?" "I love it." Olivia felt a deep connection to the woman whose ring was now hers. Somehow, she knew that it had been the symbol of a long and loving marriage. And now it was a promise of another union. One she hoped would be just as happy. "How would you feel about getting married on Christmas Day?" Ethan asked, pulling her close. "This Christmas?" It would give her less than 3 weeks to plan a wedding. "This Christmas, next Christmas, whatever makes you happy." "Either way, I want to spend every Christmas together," Ethan said. "And you would make a beautiful Christmas bride." Olivia could see it clear as day, exchanging vows in front of a beautiful tree like the one behind her now. A red and green wedding bouquet. Poinsettias lining the aisle. And best of all, their love and their marriage would forever be intertwined with the magic of Christmas. "You don't have to decide right now," Ethan said. "All that matters is that you'll be mine. Forever." He lowered his head and captured her lips with his. Olivia forgot about trees and rings and weddings, losing herself in the feel of this kiss. A kiss she wished could last forever. The end. This has been Under the Mistletoe. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2023 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2023 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.